So the body parts of Allah. So for this subject, I am joined by my lovely wife, Elle, and as well as a close friend of ours, Anthony Rogers. Welcome.
Hey, hey.
So I guess the main question someone might have is why are we talking or even care about the body parts of Allah? Seems to be a bit of an odd sort of topic, I guess. I mean, who cares what body parts this false deity has? I would say for me, my main thing with this is one of the common arguments Muslims will bring up whenever we're talking to them is saying, oh, look, do you believe that God, came here, he had legs, he walked around, he took showers, he pooped, he peed, he ate food. So this seems to be a hard topic for them to grasp as far as God interacting with the world in an intimate fashion. So, I normally like to point to their God and say, hey, this is what we see in your sources according to your reliable documentation.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, it's false advertising, right? That's part of the primary objection. They put forth this idea that Allah is the kind of figure that Christians say God is in his essential nature, that is anterior to and independently of the incarnation. We believe that God is infinite, eternal, unchangeable, and so forth. God is spirit, right? He doesn't have a body. The incarnation is not what we say is true of God as he is in his divine nature, but what became true by virtue of the incarnation. So it does have implications for the nature of God in the sense that we believe this is something that's possible for God to do, but we don't believe that, having anatomical features or something like that are part of his essential and eternal nature. But they want to say that is what they believe, and their doctrine precludes something like an incarnation. And for all the reasons you mentioned, I often think that Islam presents the most crude version of the denial of the incarnation. Other groups reject the incarnation. I mean, no group that's pagan in its foundational teachings is going to like the incarnation. Not even the ancient pagans. People often try and liken Christianity to ancient paganism, where you have these humanoid deities or what have you, but in no case in ancient paganism do you have the notion of an absolute God that becomes incarnate. The notion of the absolute becoming incarnate is anathema to the ancient Greek mind, right? Spirit and matter are antithetical. When they talked about physical gods, they were talking about, hey, look at that. Dr. Edward Dalcor is calling me. Tell him I can't take a call right now. But yeah, so false advertising. They pretend that their deity is something other than what is the case, and they pretend that God can't become incarnate. Oh, and I was saying that they present the crudest form of this objection because others will object to it, right? Jehovah's Witnesses object to it, Mormons object to it, all sorts of groups object to it. But it's only with Muslims that you really get all the guttural stuff. They just have this antipathy for, bodily functions and stuff like that. So on top of rejecting the idea that God could become a man, the last thing he could do is possibly have any direct contact with things like, going to the bathroom or being born of a woman or something like that.
Which I admit is odd because if Allah is the creator of all things, then the bodily function is Allah's creation. And he intended the body to function this way. So by them calling it dirty, this bodily function dirty, then they're calling what Allah has created as something that is defiled or indecent. So it's often interesting that they'll go to that.
Yeah, and it's important maybe to throw this in real quickly because we do have in Scripture this distinction between clean and unclean. And in the Bible, though, these are pedagogical. These serve to illustrate some spiritual truth or some redemptive reality that was going to be accomplished by Christ. They're not intended to draw lines between moral and immoral, right? And so distinctions between that which is essentially holy and that which isn't. But Muslims do carry it to that extreme, right? So for them, God really is sort of, has this gag reflex when, I don't know, somebody bleeds or somebody goes to the bathroom or something.
Yeah, it's just, again, if Allah created it and you're saying it's so defiled, it's so nasty that Allah obviously couldn't have any part of it. I find that interesting, definitely, because even in the Quran, we are at least Adam was created in Allah's image. So the image of Allah is Adam. So that would include all those nasty parts that they like to point to.
Yeah, and in fact, did you guys, I don't know if you guys have that hadith handy. I have it right here, though. It's literally on my screen. And it's important here to point out that biblically, when the Bible talks about man being made in the image and likeness of God, this refers to the fact that man, as God's creation, his special creation, has a likeness to God, who is himself a spiritual being, not a physical being, but a being who is capable of thinking, willing, and so forth. And as his image bearers, we're able to then relate to him. We're able to know him. We're able to render unto him worship, commune with him. That's what's involved in this notion of God's image in the Bible. And that's evident from scriptural usage. For example, when it talks about man being conformed to the image of Christ, having fallen, our image as reflective of God has been sullied by sin. And so we now need to be transformed back into the purity of that image. And it's clearly not talking about our physical anatomy changing, right? I don't grow in sanctification and notice my fingers starting to look different, right? It's talking about the moral perfection of the creature back into the divine likeness, or the purity of that likeness. But the Islamic sources quite obviously took this in a crudely anthropomorphic way. And so you read, for example, in Bukhari, this is in volume 8, it says, it's from Abu Huraira, Allah created Adam in his complete shape and form, 60 cubits in height. And then another hadith is in Sahih Muslim, also from Abu Huraira, where it basically says the same thing. But some Muslims try to play games here and say that the pronoun his refers to Adam. So when it says Allah created Adam in his complete shape and form, the his there refers to Adam's complete shape and form. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say that Allah created Adam in the shape or form of Adam, right?
Yeah.
According to that shape, it assumes that shape or form already exists, and Adam's being patterned after it. That doesn't make sense, but it's obvious from another statement in Sahih Muslim, 32:63-25. It says, Allah's apostle is reported to have said, when any one of you fights with his brother, he should avoid his face, for Allah created Adam in his own form. And so it's very clear here that this form refers to the way Allah looks. And if I could just throw one more in, it's one of my favorites from the Islamic sources. This is found in Al-Tabari, but he recounts one report of the creation of Adam, how Allah first made Adam as a lifeless statue that stood erect but didn't have life in it yet. And the angels happened upon it, Satan among them. It's interesting. Satan's always with the angels, right? Muslims pretend he's not an angel, but according to the sources, although he is a jinn, the jinn are themselves a class of angels, right, or a subcategory. And so, anyways, the angels see Adam. Satan happens to be there with them, and they're initially frightened. But Satan says he's going to go over and investigate and get to the bottom of this. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys before, but so Satan goes over to this statue, and he goes in through its mouth and then out through its butt. And then he comes back to the angels and he says, don't worry, fellas. This is my paraphrase. Don't worry, fellas. That is hollow, but your Lord is solid. So that's the idea is they're afraid because they think it's Allah, until Satan inspects, finds out that it's hollow, whereas Allah, by contrast, is not hollow, he's solid. And there's actually a good bit of confirmation of this all across the Islamic sources, that this is a notion that was very standard among Muslims. Because, for example, in Surah 112, the occasion for the revelation of Surah 112, it was allegedly certain Jews asked Muhammad, "What is your Lord made out of?" And then he gives the 4 verses of Surah 112, Surah Al-Ikhlas, and there's a statement in there. It says, "Say, He is Allah, the One. He begets not, neither is He begotten." But there's this statement that is often translated, "He is the Eternal." Right? He begets not, neither is He begotten, and there's none like unto Him. That statement, if you look at different Quran translations, it's actually translated in a whole host of different ways, because Muslims can't agree on how they should translate it. And the reason they can't agree is very simple. They've rejected the one clear meaning of the term, and so throw open the floodgate of possibilities, right? If you reject the way it's actually used in the ancient Arabic Islamic sources, well, then it's anybody's, decision what's going to supply the meaning here. But again, going to Al-Tabari gives a series of narrations of people talking about what this word means in ancient Arabic. And the one that goes back to Muhammad and has the most support, according to Tabari, is the word that the word means solid. And so, according to Surah 112, which was answering the question what God is made of, says He's solid. And here you have these other narrations saying Allah's solid. And I mean, I could quote a whole host of sources that go along with that, but it's very clear in the Islamic sources. This being is very tangible, and Satan knows how to make out the distinction between him and others by seeing if he can get out through his butt cheeks.
Now, I think this is very interesting. I think this is one of the a huge issue for Muslims, because you have the angels, just this story alone. You have the angels who know Allah, who've seen Allah, who have been in Allah's presence, confused because they think Adam is Allah and they're afraid of that. So obviously, Allah looks so similar to Adam, or Adam looks so similar to Allah, that unless you go through his body, you don't know the difference. You can't tell the difference between the two.
Makes me think it'd be very useful to know what Adam looked like, because then we could easily best Satan just by making ourselves appear like Adam. Why not? There'd be good information, wouldn't it? You could just put on a mask of Adam, or I don't know, maybe like a Muslim version of Halloween or something, dress up like Adam and get Satan off your tail.
I don't know any growth serum that would make us that tall, but
oh yeah, that's
maybe
true.
short of that.
But remember, Adam shrunk. He's like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, or whatever. Or Ant-Man. I don't know what this is, but we're told that man decreased in stature. I don't know how quickly that happened. Maybe Adam didn't shrink personally. It was just mankind. But
it sounds like it was the generations afterwards that progressively got shorter, which, if I was a Muslim, the thing I would do is try to find any bone of Adam's.
Yeah.
That would be my main point if I was a Muslim.
Satan and the jinns do like bones, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a feast for them. They eat dung and bones and other things.
That is true. So
wonderful, wacky world of Islam.
My main point being is I've been told by many Muslims that we can't understand Allah because there's nothing quite like Allah in creation, except for, again, Adam obviously was so like Allah that the angels who are used to being in Allah's presence couldn't tell the difference. Because I'm pretty sure I would be able to tell the difference between my wife and someone else. So obviously they look so similar that they couldn't tell the difference.
Interesting.
Interesting.
This actually raises an issue which is why it's good to talk about these things. I have all these sources, right? I have hundreds of pages of quotations from the Islamic sources on Allah's body parts and so forth. And I constantly, in thinking about some of them, realize there's new issues related to this. But you just said something that reminded me. So there's all sorts of hadith that talk about the fact that faithful Muslims are going to see Allah on the final day. And on the day of judgment, he's actually going to play a little bit of a game, right? He's going to engage in shape-shifting, which is interesting in light of today's climate, right? Where everybody thinks they can transform and all this stuff. Well, Allah's going to do a little of the physical changing, morphing in front of people's eyes. And so what's going to happen is he's going to appear to people, and certain people are going to prostrate to him as their Lord that are not Muslims, because they're hoodwinked by this deceptive appearance, right? It's not really Allah's true form. And that group of people will eventually be cast into hellfire. And this sort of thing is going to happen through a series of shape-shiftings. And the Muslims are going to refuse to worship Allah throughout all of this until it says he appears to them in his true form, right? He's going to appear to them in his true form. And what's interesting, according to these narrations, is Muslims are supposed to be able to recognize him at this point. Now, the reason I'm saying this is interesting in light of what you just said is because it makes me think, if Adam's going to be there on that day and Allah's going to be there on that day, how are they going to be sure that it's not Allah? Are they all, maybe they're all going to do the Satan experiment. I don't know. Maybe Satan's going to be there to verify, his past experience with this, with Allah's twin, Adam. But listen to this. This actually is so profoundly problematic for Islam. Listen, so it says, this is from Sahih Bukhari, volume 9, book 93, number 532c. It says, Allah will come to them in his appearance, which they know. Okay, so somehow the Muslims already have a knowledge of Allah's appearance. There's some way they're going to know this is really Allah, right? Now, another version of this same hadith, listen to how it words it. It actually, these are actually very long hadiths, but this is from Sahih Bukhari, volume 6. It says, then Allah, the Lord of the worlds, will come to them in a shape nearest to the picture they had in their minds about him. Now, remember, Muslims are the ones who claim that God has no form. You can't image him. You can't make a picture of him. You can't bow down to him. That's all shirk, according to Muslims. But here's the Islamic sources saying that the Muslims on the final day, who are going to escape judgment and be accepted or admitted into paradise, these are those who have an understanding, a mental picture of their deity in their heads. So all Muslims are walking around with some idolatrous image in their head, an image of their deity. Muslims should never be talking to Christians, telling them, that we're idolaters. Now, they might have some room to speak of other people that do worship idols, even if they claim to be Christian, right? But laying that at the feet of Christianity as such doesn't make any sense, because as Christians, we don't believe in making images of God. And even when it comes to Christ, who became incarnate, we don't know what he looked like, right? So scripture never tells us that when we see Jesus on that day, we're going to know it's him, because we already have this mental image of him in our heads, right? I mean, I'm sure the sight of him will be so overpowering that it'll be no question in our minds that it's him. Just like, the light of the sun manifests itself, right? It's its own witness that it's that bright ball in the sky. We're going to know who Jesus is when we see him, but not because we have this pre-established idol, erect in our head.
So based upon that, he would have to appear to everyone individually different, because everyone would have their own concept of what Allah looks like. Now, the sources say that we will know him by his shin. At least the Muslims would know him by his shin.
It's apparently a pretty ravishing shin.
So every Muslim has the exact same picture of Allah's shin in their mind?
Well, I mean, we do put this question to them on occasion, don't we? And I don't know that I've ever heard the answer in the midst of all this. I'm not even sure how a Muslim might want to respond to that, right? Like how do they all distinguish this shin as his shin? And why the shin in particular, right? Now, it may be, and you guys know this, but it may be that this shin stands out because of its unusual association with the rest of Allah's parts, right? If you follow the Muslim sources and you do it like a good Muslim, right, like a good Salafi, for example, you know that you can't just infer from one body part of Allah another body part. You have to have an explicit reference to it in the sources. And so Muslims being very strict and holding to their sources, they don't say, well, if Allah has a shin, then he must have two shins, right? That's not the Muslim mind. That's not what their sources inspire them to do. They infer only this from the explicit statement: Allah has a shin. So all we know, according to, say, that hadith that talks about Allah's shin and it being revelatory that this is Allah, is that he has at least a shin. We don't even know if it's connected to the foot, right? It doesn't say that in the sources. We're just told he has a shin. And so it is true, according to Islamic sources, to say that he has a shin, but not that he has two shin. Right? Now, I'm not saying you'll never find a Muslim who will run along and say there's a shin. But so Truth Defenders is anticipating later discussion. One of my favorite subjects is Allah's loins. I brought it up in my debate with Shabir Ali. But there again, you've got body parts. For all we know, the loins are connected to the shin, or maybe there's an invisible bond between these things, and there's a gap between one part and another. I don't know, but again, I mean, well, I don't want to jump the gun. There's a lot of stuff we learn about Allah's parts that, we have to put on the brakes and not just assume, well, I have a shin and it's connected to my knee and then my upper thigh and so forth, and then down below to my foot. We can't just assume that.
No, I'd say every Muslim scholar, and I've read quite a few papers in preparation just for this conversation, but every Muslim scholar would agree, just because it says, for example, in the Quran that Allah has eyes. Well, it doesn't say that Allah has, eyebrows or eyelashes or anything else around that. So they're just floating eyeballs. That's all we know. And there's nothing else connected to it or around it, which again paints a very odd picture for a god. I mean, even someone who tries to mock Christianity, referring to, the spaghetti monster in the sky, is more of an easier picture than what they're painting of Allah.
Yeah, in fact, oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as someone said in the comments, I guess there's a hadith that says that Allah is actually indeed in the sky.
Wait, what?
So
Allah what?
Is in the sky.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Above the seventh heaven.
But when the slave woman asked Muhammad if Allah was in the sky, he said yes. So specifically the sky, not
so
even
a
just
specific location.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, a lot of things here, but one thing is, so you mentioned the eyes, and in the Quran. So, I mean, here again, you can't just assume normal. I mean, what you would see, there's some sense in which the human body, there's remember, what is it, Michelangelo? Who is it that had that figure? Remember, there's this famous figure, a painting of a man, and it's kind of showing the symmetry of the human body. There's a man standing like this. You know what I'm talking about? It's a very famous picture. I'm sure you've seen it.
You mean with the band spread out and then circle around him?
So chiropractics type.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a symmetry, right? There's some things that aren't duplicated, but well, I mean, for the most part, I mean, you got an ear here, you got an ear here, right? You got an eyeball here, you got an eyeball here, right? Nostril, this side of your mouth, that side of your mouth. When we say something like Allah has eyes, because the Quran does, and when Muslims say that, we're not necessarily saying the same thing unless we know how to think like Muslims, because the Islamic sources don't simply say he has two eyes, right? We know that he has more than one, first of all, because numerous hadiths distinguish him from the Dajjal. Apparently, the Dajjal looks a lot like Adam and Allah, because people are going to be confused, but this is going to make him stand out from Allah, namely that he has one eye. And so the hadith say that the Dajjal has one eye, but Allah is not one-eyed. And so it repeatedly makes this as the point of contrast. But what's interesting is when you look at the Quran, and again, this is their source, and it's also the way they interpret it in many cases. Various Islamic scholars point to the fact that when the Quran speaks of Allah's eyes, it uses the plural. So you have a dual form, which would indicate two, but you also have a plural form. And so numerous Muslims will speak of the plural eyes of Allah, right? Not two eyes, but three or more. And so again, you can't assume just because we're talking about oh, and by the way, I mean, you might ask then, why doesn't it speak of the shins? That's one other. I mean, it wouldn't be sufficient if it just said shin to say, well, if it doesn't say shins, there's not two. But when you see how specific Allah can be, you do wonder why it only mentions a shin. And in any case, as a Muslim, you don't have warrant for saying two shins without Allah saying so. So he has at least one shin and more than two eyes.
That's where it really comes down to, is from a Christian perspective, you've got to understand, you got to basically break your concept of what God is in order to understand from a Muslim perspective what they're thinking about. Because it's just a bunch of these body parts all put together, and they're not sure how they all mesh together. I've never had a Muslim actually give me an explanation for how they actually connect.
Yeah, so unapologetic apologetics raises a good point. So whenever you're talking about something that's composite, that is made up of parts, we say as Christians that God is simple, not meaning simplistic or something like that, but in the sense of not made up of parts. God is essentially one. The persons of the Trinity share one essence, right? It's an undivided essence. Well, in anything that's composite, the thing formed is the end product, the end result of that composition, right? You don't have a phone, for example, until all the parts are there, right? The parts precede the formed thing, the composite whole. And so if Allah's made up of parts, then there are these parts that precede him, and then there's something more basic than Allah, and we have to ask what brought about this composition, what brought about this conglomeration of things that now comprise Allah. So it's a huge problem for Muslims, especially when you consider, the Kalam version. I'm not here putting forward this argument. I'm just pointing out as a matter of historical fact, the version of the cosmological argument known as the Kalam, which people like William Lane Craig use and so forth, actually developed in Islamic circles. Muslims reflecting on the writings of the philosophers, which Christians had preserved and translated for them because Muslims couldn't translate them during that whole period. Anyways, Christians had translated the works of various philosophers. Muslims began reading them. And so they developed a version of the cosmological argument known as the Kalam cosmological argument. And a important component of that is this observation that creation is a composite thing, right? It's a composition of parts. And that's one of the reasons one insists that it has to have a creator that precedes it. Right. And so unless you're going to say the creator himself is made, you have to deny to him composition. And so it's funny to me just to observe this inconsistency that Muslims develop this argument that precludes composition in the creator, but then they turn around and they have in their sources this idea that Allah is a composite being.
I think that's an interesting point. I think that brings up a bit of an issue. Again, what came before, the composite, then Allah? Are these composites eternal with Allah? Are these body parts all there all the time, eternally? Wouldn't that be partners in some extent with Allah? Because now we got eternal attributes going along with him.
Yeah, you definitely have the idea in Islam of eternal attributes. And by the way, you even have in the Islamic sources discussion of something being both eternal and created, two things that don't usually jive in most people's minds, right? But there are discussions in Islamic context, and it probably comes from something like this. But anyways, if you read, I think the source that most memorably presents this to me was there's an article, I think it's online, it's by G.F. Haddad. He's a Muslim, a very well-known Ash'ari Muslim. So he's not a Salafi, and we should say that while I think the Islamic sources are very clear that Allah has all these parts, not all Muslims like that. And so a lot of Muslims try to reason their way around all of this, right? So they play a colossal game of hopscotch over the evidence and bobbing and weaving and all the rest. But anyways, there are these Muslims who would reject all that. And the standard view of Muslims, Ash'ari Muslims, though, even though many of them will reject this stronger form advocated by Salafis, they still affirm that Allah has a multiplicity of attributes. And so G.F. Haddad, he has this article where he's talking about the uncreated eternal Quran. And he's pointing out that since the Quran is Allah's direct speech, so it's an attribute of Allah, it's eternal. But he, along with all other Muslims, would insist, and does insist in that article, that the Quran is not itself Allah, right? It's eternal because it's an attribute of Allah, but how do you say the Quran, this verbal dictation that we recite as Muslims, I'm not saying me, but, speaking for them, that verbal dictation that they recite can't be Allah himself, right? So they have to draw a distinction. So they say that the Quran, as one of Allah's attributes, his attribute of speech, is eternal and uncreated, but other than him. Now, Haddad goes on to point out then, he says, it follows from this, note this, it follows from this that it is wrong to say that there's not other eternal uncreated things besides Allah. He says there are as many uncreated or eternal things as there are divine attributes. So it's not just the Quran. When we legitimately say to Muslims, say not two, right? Your book, your false book says say not three, misrepresenting the Trinity as belief in three gods. You say to us, say not three. We may legitimately say not two, because you actually do affirm two eternal, uncreated realities. We believe in only one as Christians. The Father, Son, and Spirit are essentially one, right? The Quran and Allah are not one entity, one essence. They're two separate things. And, oops, hello?
Yeah,
oh,
you're still there.
That was weird. My computer went dark for a second. I've never seen it do that. These are new monitors. So anyways, so they are affirming that Allah's attribute of speech is other than him. And that's true of all his other attributes. So his attribute of hearing, his attribute of seeing, his attribute of whatever, all of them are things in addition to his essence, right? Additional things. That's huge, right? So we now just look at what we've got so far. We've got problems with the Islamic rejection of the Incarnation. Allah is very much at home with not just assuming a form, actually, essentially, eternally being a form, a being with a form and anatomical features. They're freakish-looking forms or features, right? One shin, several eyes. We've got more attributes to go, but now Allah is a composite being, right? Another problem with a composite being as the creator, because it would itself require a creator, is that a composite being also presupposes other limitations, right? If Allah has things like hands or eyes or shin, it presupposes a spatio-temporal environment, Right. That's why there's a hadith. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but Muslims often butcher it. They misrepresent it badly. The hadith says, so they claim that the hadith is saying that Allah existed before everything else, right? And the way they quote it sometimes is Allah existed before there was anything, or something like that. But what it says is, the hadith says, Allah existed before there was anything else, and his throne was over the waters. Now, notice that very carefully. It says, or it says Allah existed and there was nothing before him. Okay. That doesn't by itself prove that he was there by himself, right? It only means that there was nothing that preceded him. But notice what it says. Allah existed and there was nothing before him, and his throne was over the waters. And so, as some Muslims point out, this hadith presupposes the existence at that time of the throne and the water, right? So everything else is subsequent to that. Okay, but the only thing the hadith affirms is that there was nothing before him. It doesn't say there was nothing coeterminous or coeternal with him. And if you listen to who Muslims like G.F. Haddad, who's a Sunni Muslim, a Sunni scholar, there are as many eternal realities alongside of Allah as there are divine attributes. So say not 99, Muslims.
Well, that brings up another huge issue. So you have all these attributes, all these eternal things with Allah. So this list is vastly growing, including all the waters, including Allah's throne, including the Quran, including all of Allah's body parts that are just floating there in this mass. That also leads to another issue later on in the Quran, when the Quran says during the Day of Judgment and the destruction that only Allah's face will remain. So all these eternal things that are always with Allah all pass away. So they're not really eternal now, are they?
Yeah. So I'm pulling up the surah here real quickly. As in Surah 28:88, as one example, it says, "There's no deity except him. Everything will be destroyed except his face. His is the judgment," and so forth. So if you've got eyes, hands, feet, a shin, and so forth, and everything's going to perish with the exception of Allah's face, then it's like Allah's going to be this Cheshire cat, right? The rest of his body is going to disappear, and you're just going to see this this face. I mean, I'm actually, yeah, it's not even necessarily like a Cheshire cat. I'm cheating a little bit. I've already said we can't do this, right? I'm assuming that this face, that the eyes go there, but I don't know that from the Islamic sources.
No reference says that the eyes are inside the face.
Yeah, and we don't know if there's a mouth to smile on that face per se. There are. I'm going to be fair to Muslims here, although I don't know how much it helps, but there are sources that get very descriptive of Allah and talk about him as a beardless youth and talk about his smile and so forth. Muslims will normally say those hadiths are not sound, right? Those are rejected hadith. I say it doesn't really help them too much because there's far too many things in their sources that still tell us he has all sorts of anatomical features. But if these other sources were brought in, we would have a little bit more of a coherent picture of this being and the relationship of these things. But apart from that, we don't have it. We just have to assume he's got eyes, and there's some relation between them and the other body parts, but we don't know exactly what, right?
Yeah. So I don't know. I was going through the source, and the thing that popped up into my mind, I don't know if you're much of a science fiction fan, but it was these things from Doctor
Who. Yeah, could be. Or that reminds me, isn't it? What was it? Well, I mean, it reminds me of the Spider-Man thing where he shoots his web on somebody's face, and it's the person can't talk. Or what's the those creatures? I don't know if you remember Popeye. It's probably before most people's times, but there were these creatures that I think had faces kind of like that. I don't know.
Because
That
I mean,
works.
Allah doesn't have, and there's no description of Allah having a nose.
And not that I know of, not that I've come across. Yeah, I always hesitate because I'm thinking nothing surprises
There's,
me anymore in the
there's
Islamic
probably
sources.
something somewhere.
Yeah,
Pull it up in some lost hadith.
yeah. I've scoured the hadith. Like I told you, I've got hundreds of references to all sorts of things in the hadith literature and in the Quran, and some things you'd be surprised that the Quran actually mentions. In fact, Truth Defenders mentioned the one that I brought up in my debate with Shabir Ali. In the debate, I wanted to not only point out because I was debating Shabir on Tawheed, and Muslims claim that Allah is absolutely one and he can't become incarnate and all this kind of stuff. So a devastating reply to that is to observe that Allah is made up of parts. He has these other attributes, including anatomical ones. And I wanted to bring up an attribute that would be especially embarrassing. Oh, yeah, the goons. Yeah, the goons.
Goons. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Carol. So I thought, well, what better than to bring up Allah's loins? And so what's interesting here, the Muslims are even embarrassed by this. Even the Muslims who are faithful to their sources and affirm all these attributes, even those Muslims, Salafi Muslims, are quite embarrassed by their sources when it comes to Allah's gonads, right? So according to, and I'll show you how they're embarrassed by this. If you were to look at Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, you're not going to find the reference to Allah's loins if you're reading the English. Not because there's not hadith that say that Allah has loins, but because in the standard translation of Sahih Muslim, that hadith has not been faithfully rendered into English. Now here's something that's interesting. I've talked to Arabic speakers on this, and I've also read scholarly literature by people that are more than familiar with Arabic. For example, Livnatz Holtzman, who's a exceptionally good Jewish scholar whose competence in the Islamic sources is just top notch. But anyways, she has this whole book on anthropomorphism in Islam, and she talks about the hadith related to Allah's loins, among other things. And one of the things these people that I've spoken to in this book that I mentioned, they point out is that in the translation of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, it doesn't include the reference to Allah's loins in either the English or the corresponding Arabic. However, quite curiously, when you go to the abridged version of Sahih Bukhari, it doesn't render it into English, but it's right there in the Arabic. Right now, the reason this is puzzling is at first because usually when you abridge something, you're condensing it, right? So I would expect maybe it to not. Well, first of all, you don't just remove a part of a hadith and so misrepresent it. It's one thing if you don't include all the hadith, but if you include a part of a hadith, you should include the whole thing, unless you're trying to hide something. But yeah, it's weird to have the rest of the information in the abridged version. And Livnatz Holtzman, among others, points out that this is found in the standard Arabic manuscripts and so forth. But so here's the account. The account is that at one point, this primordial womb, it was in the presence of Allah and reached up and grabbed Allah by the loins. And then Allah said, "Stop it!" Right? It says stop it. I'm assuming that's how he said it. I don't know how else you'd say it if you're grabbed by your loins. So Allah says, "Stop it!" And then asks, "What do you want?" And the womb says that it basically wants Allah to bless those who are good to kith and kin. So good to those who come from the same womb, right? So according to this, Allah has loins, right? And again, I mean, this is in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, even though they don't render it for English. It's not meant for our eyes, right? They conceal it from us. This unsightly part of Allah's anatomy they keep from us.
It's not something they talk about in public, in other words, huh?
Mm-mm.
You
In
don't
fact-
speak about this.
In fact, if you haven't seen the debate with Shabir, watch it, because he got kind of embarrassed there. It achieved its purpose. When he had his little rebuttal period, he's like, "Oh, I didn't know we could talk about such things in a church." And I'm thinking, well, first of all, this is not a church. It was on a church property. But secondly, it wasn't a church service. There's nothing about the building apart from it being used as a, when being used as a place of worship, that means I can't say something like this. But yeah, he was really embarrassed, and he was trying his hardest to deflect. Right, Anthony is being so improper by talking about Allah's loins. I think what's more improper is the fact that you've got a deity and sources about that deity that ascribe loins to him.
Well, what's so telling about that is he's not denying that it's there by saying that. He's affirming that it's actually there. He's just saying it seems improper that you would bring up such a sensitive topic in such a holy place. I don't know
what
if
it reminds me of? If you've ever seen one of these cheating programs where somebody's on camera and they're going to go catch this cheater, there was this show they used to have called Cheaters or whatever, and there was this camera crew that would go around and they would catch people, and inevitably the person who's caught with somebody that they're not supposed to be with, they always say, I can't believe you'd bring cameras here and put me on TV, and and I'm thinking, how incredible sin is, right? That people think that those who are being sinned against are the guilty party, right? And but same sort of thing, right? How dare you bring up that unsightly business about Allah's loins?
Never denying that that's a thing. Now that also opens up an interesting little bit, because I mean, if where it's referring to Allah's eyes, it's talking about Allah seeing with them. When it talks about Allah's face, it's Allah facing towards them. There's always a reason given why he has these things. So was the whole reason of him having that is so that they could be grabbed? Or is there something else that we're not being told about?
Well, there's some interesting possibilities here. I mean, one thing I would point out is if you look at the Quran and hadith, of course, but if you look at it and its discussion of Allah not being a father, not having children, not having sons, not having daughters, it often says Allah doesn't have a consort. And people reading this sort of thing might be inclined to the conclusion, okay, Allah is just not the sort of being that could beget a child. I mean, because as you know, it's rejecting the notion of begetting in a crudely physical sense. It says he doesn't beget children. And it's the context of these remarks are the pagans who think of their gods as physical beings, right? That have relations with one another. They copulate and have children. And Muhammad rejects this idea that Allah has done so. He doesn't have children, right? He doesn't have a consort. But the false conclusion is from this that he doesn't because he couldn't, in principle, because he doesn't have such features. But we've just seen he does have these features. If you read the sources carefully, the reason Allah doesn't have children is because he doesn't have a consort. It's not because he doesn't have the equipment. Okay, he's got the equipment. He just hasn't found the right woman. That's basically what the Quran's saying. Okay, if you're following the Quran, okay, Allah just, either there's not such a woman out there, or Allah hasn't liked any of the ones he's happened upon. I don't know what it is, but the fact is that Allah is a being with form. He has a face. He has a shin. He has loins, right? The equipment's there. I assume it's working.
I don't know if it's solid, though. I'm not sure how well it could work.
That's a valid point. But now, so there are, I mentioned before that there are certain hadiths and other traditions that talk about Allah being solid, and Satan concluding that Adam was not Allah because he was able to go in the mouth and out the rump. Well, some Muslims have tried to put some things together here, because I think what you're assuming is there's no cavity, right? How do things work if there's, right? There's got to be some way of escape. Well, so some of these Muslims do actually make allowance for aspects of Allah to not be hollow. I mean, to not be solid, right? So, for example, I mean, I can pull it up here. Let me see if I. Where is this article at? This is. I told you I have. Hey, why isn't that popping up? I wonder if it's over here.
If you share your screen, I can share it on.
I thought I had it right here handy on my. Interesting. Let me just try this one more time.
Nate in the comments said they make Allah wince.
Oh, this is strange. It's I had just pulled it up on my computer, and let me see if I can do it this way. So Betty, oh, there it is. There it is. All right. So, okay. So I'm not telling you that this is the position of a lot of Muslims, but it is a position of certain Muslims, and it's generated by the observations that I've made, which are held by a lot of other Muslims, namely that Allah is solid, he has a form, all that kind of stuff, right? That's standard among Salafis, and it's squarely based on the sources. But this is from a Muslim named Hisham bin Salam al-Jawaliki. It says he claimed that what he worshipped is in the form of a man, but without being flesh and blood, that his deity is a diffused white light. Now, remember, you can't assume that just because he's made out of white light that he's not tangible. Remember, the jinn were made from fire, right? So, but the jinn are tangible beings. I don't know how. You don't see them or anything else, but they're tangible beings. Well, he goes on and says he claimed that his deity has 5 senses and has hands, feet, eyes, ears, nose, mouth. He claimed that his upper half is hollow and the lower half is solid, and that his object of worship has black hair being made of black light, whereas the rest is made of white light. Okay, so this is what at least one Muslim said. Well, here's another Muslim. His name was Dawood al-Jawaribi. It says he said that his deity is a body in the form of a human with flesh and blood, and said his upper half is hollow and lower half is solid, that he has curly hair. However, he claimed it is a body unlike other bodies, and flesh unlike other flesh, and blood unlike other blood. And he said, now listen to this. He says, pardon me for the beard and private parts, but feel free to ask me about everything else. So here's this Muslim talking about Allah having a beard and private parts. I mean, again, this sort of thing is generated by the stuff that no Muslim can deny being in their sources. They might try and, get around it. They might try and reinterpret it, but it's there in the sources, and I don't think it's legitimately reinterpreted. I think it just means what it says.
My question would be, how does he know about the blood? Because everything else was visual, which he could see, but the blood would be internal unless you can cut this creature.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent some Muslims were willing to engage in inference. A lot of Muslims today won't, right?
Yeah,
I think inference is legitimate. We do it biblically, right? So we believe what Scripture says and what we can logically infer from Scripture, right? And we have biblical precedent for that. Jesus, for example, in arguing against the Sadducees, they didn't believe in the future resurrection, and also didn't believe that man has a spirit that exists after the death of the body, right? So there's no future rejoining of body and soul. Jesus refutes them by going to the Torah, which was requisite given that the Sadducees reject other books after the Torah, right? They only accepted the Torah. So Jesus goes to the Torah to refute them, and he points to the verse where it says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This was spoken by God long after they were dead, right? In Exodus 3, God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Therefore, Jesus said, he is not a God of the dead, but of the living. The argument turns on the use of the present tense. I am, not I was, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Jesus infers from that statement that God is the God of the living. Therefore, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are alive, and they will be resurrected someday in the future. So we think something like inference is legitimate as long as it's done properly from biblical affirmations and so forth. While Muslims don't tend to do that sort of thing when it comes to Allah's parts, they don't conclude, well, if he has a shin and he has a foot, then these two must be connected. They just say he has a shin and a foot, however they might be related. Maybe these other Muslims were more willing to engage in inference. Maybe if the Quran speaks of Allah being solid, they, I don't know, they were willing to conclude that therefore Allah takes up space, wherever he's at. You know what I mean? Like, I think some Muslims would not conclude from the statement, say that Allah has a face, that he necessarily takes up space. They do have to say that, but not necessarily as a matter of inference. They have to say that because, for example, there's a hadith that talks about Allah putting his hand on Muhammad's back, and it says between his two shoulder blades. And it says Muhammad could feel its coolness in his chest. So apparently Allah's got cold hands. So ladies, maybe this is why he doesn't have a wife. Maybe no woman, she's got cold, clammy hands or something, and she never felt comfortable in his, I don't know. But he's got cold hands. Muhammad felt it's, Allah's cold touch, his icy touch. Right? It wasn't the warm touch of Allah. It was his cold, icy touch. He felt it in his chest, but it fit between his two shoulder blades. Notice. So this deity, and I don't know, this is, the whole picture gets stranger, doesn't it? Because remember, Adam was created in Allah's image, 60 cubits tall, 90 feet. So did Allah it makes me think of, remember the genie in Aladdin? Remember at one point in the Aladdin cartoon, who was it that played the genie? Robin Williams. Remember this? So yep. Robin Williams, he comes out of the lamp, and he's identifying himself, and he swells up really large, and he says, infinite cosmic power. And then he shrinks down, and he says, in itty bitty living space, right? So he can be really big, but then he can shrink down and fit inside the lamp. And so I'm thinking maybe Allah is kind of like this genie, this jinn, and he's able to blow up like a puffer fish or something and then shrink down to the size where he could stick his hand between Muhammad's shoulder blades. I don't know. But he clearly has hands, and these clearly have limits, right? I don't know if there's...
That would make a lot of sense, definitely with how Allah reveals himself on the mountain to Moses, how he shows his pinky, puts his pinky into creation, shows his little pinky finger. But it's implied that it's rather large.
Yeah.
Not something that would be a small little pinky finger floating in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure that's a Jewish derived, the Jews of Arabia at the time of Muhammad, the Talmudic Jews, had a crudely anthropomorphic conception of God. Right, you find all sorts of statements to this effect in the Talmud. Now, it may well be that in these sources, it's intended to speak of God's ability to condescend, because in Christianity, we do think of God being able to appear visibly and palpably, not because he's limited to these ways of existing, but because he's able. Right, Muslims don't accept this idea of God being able to condescend. So if the sources ascribe these attributes or qualities to him, they're part of his eternal essential nature. There's no condescension in Islam. There's none of these categories exist. That's why they object to the incarnation, right? But it may well be that these Jewish sources that they're deriving this from are just reflecting their belief that God can condescend. But the fact is, you do find a lot of very strange statements of that sort in the Talmuds, where you've got, for example, the idea of God at Sinai. Remember, the Quran speaks of God basically hanging the mountain over them, right? That idea comes out of Jewish, sources. So other things come from the Jews as well. Like there's some sources that talk about Allah rolling up creation and putting it on his right finger, or I can't remember the breakdown. Like he puts all the earths on one finger and he puts something else on this finger. So that assumes either a very large hand, at least on that occasion. So it might be Allah in his puffed up form, or you could say it assumes that he rolls everything up very tightly, right? So that everything fits on that same hand that fit between Muhammad's shoulder blades.
Yeah, remember when we are talking about the pinky being shown earlier on, that doesn't necessarily say it's attached to any one hand.
No,
it's just the pinky itself entering into creation. I just want to clarify that. So we've got hands, we've got a floating pinky as well. Very oddly shaped.
We've got Alonzo Harris. So
I'm pretty sure he's one of your biggest fans. He likes to comment on like all of our videos saying Anthony Rogers believes in 3 gods.
Yeah, I've developed this picture over time that he's one of these special Muslims, right? I mean, I don't think believing in Islam is intelligent at all, but I also can make a distinction between Muslims who've got 2 functioning brain cells and this guy, he repeats the same thing. There's never any real argument. There's never any attempt to prove anything. He'll repeat it, right? So Alonso says, see, my God has 2 right hands. He brings up a good point. So he's admitting it. I think he probably believes he's being facetious, but the Islamic sources do say that Allah has 2 right hands, right?
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I know. Go ahead.
Yeah, there is a reference in the Islamic sources to a left hand. I don't know how many people have seen it, but there's only one that I know of. All the other sources speak of more than one hand and of at least 2 hands and refer to the fact that he has 2 right hands. So I don't know what this other left hand is all about, but maybe he's got 2 right hands and a left hand. It's problematic because the hadith that talks about the 2 right hands says it speaks of Allah having 2 hands and says both of them are right, and that seems to entail that that's all he has, right? Why would it say both of them are right? But maybe it just means both of the 2 that they're talking about. I don't know. Just trying to help the Muslims out of a contradiction here. And now I know helping you out of a contradiction makes your God look more freakishly like one of these Hindu deities, multiple appendages, but I'm trying to find that hadith here. Since Alonzo Harris admits that his God has 2 right hands,
I know in a previous stream, Truth Defenders posted the hadith with the left hand, but in this one, Truth Defenders posted a hadith saying both of Allah's hands. So yeah, that both sounds like 2, but then how do you have 2 that are right and 1 that's left?
Yeah. Now, the hands of Allah are actually where it really gets good in a sense, because I can imagine, especially somebody that entered into the conversation midway here and didn't hear some of the original or initial stuff that we were saying. Somebody is probably thinking, this is all figurative. You guys aren't being fair. They can turn to the Bible and show the Bible ascribing, anthropomorphic features to God and that sort of thing. So what evidence do we have that these things are intended to be understood in a straightforward and literal way? And this is usually the objection, that we get, or that I've experienced. I mean, one main objection is that the Bible has language like this. I would say it has language, but not like this, right? When the Bible speaks, say, of the eyes of God or the hands or something like that, it is almost always in some poetic section of Scripture, right? The vast majority of such references are found in the Psalms, which in their very genre are poetic. So you have a passage like Psalm 19 where it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands." It's very obvious there that hands are being used figuratively. Elsewhere in Scripture, when hands or some other features are being predicated of God, it's clear that what we have in view here is a theophany. It's a temporary visible appearance of God. And so it's not a description of God and his essential nature. And a demonstration of that would be something like what happened with Moses. Remember, Moses would speak with God face to face, and that's something that was true for Moses, but not for others. So it was something special. But Moses knew that he was not seeing God in his essential being, because he could then say, "Lord, show me your glory." And God says, "Nobody can see my glory and live," Moses, right? So this shows us that God was condescending to appear to Moses. So uh, this is what we would say with respect to the Bible. But now somebody might say, well, why don't we do the same thing with the Quran? Say this is all poetic and that sort of thing. Well, number one, that's not what many Muslims have done in history. So it's not like there's no precedent for this. And we're not just talking about fringe Muslims like the Rafidi I was quoting a moment ago. I'm talking about, Salafi Muslims who pretend to go by the first three generations. But thirdly, the hands of Allah. I say this is where it really gets good, because there's so much stuff in the Islamic material on Allah's hands that, I mean, this is really the attribute that the Muslim sources talk about the most, right? It's fun to talk about Allah's loins, his 3 eyes, his 2 right hands, his 1 shin, 2 feet, by the way. We do know 2 feet because, well, I mean, I don't know if this is sound reasoning, but according to Muslims, most often the references are to his foot being stuffed into paradise. But because it mentions that Allah has a footstool, and a footstool is the place for the feet, some Muslims will say Allah has 2 feet. Now, I don't know if that to me is a little specious, because even if I had 1 foot and I had a footstool, I'd still call it a footstool, right? Or a place for the feet, even though I'm not putting both feet on it because I only got 1, right? But anyways, the hands of Allah, there's so many references to Allah's hands. It's not funny. Now listen to this particular reference. This one in the Quran precludes trying to say this is just figurative. Surah 38:75, you've got numerous references to the angels being commanded by Allah to commit shirk, right? Allah tells the angels to bow down, prostrate to Adam. And Satan is the only one that wants to hold out. He's apparently the only monotheist in the whole bunch. He's the only one that doesn't like Allah's command to do the worst sin imaginable. He doesn't want to bow down to this creature. So Allah comes and he rebukes Satan, and he says, "How could you refuse to bow down to somebody that I created with my hands?" Now, it's actually more explicit in the Arabic. It literally says, "Somebody that I created with my own 2 hands." So he's saying this one, Adam, was created with my own 2 hands, and for that reason, you should have bowed down to him. Now, think about it. If Allah is simply using a figure of speech, and this is just a way of referring to Allah creating Adam with his power, well, everything was created with Allah's power, right? And so if that's all it means to be created with Allah's 2 hands, then there's nothing special about Adam that's not, true of all of creation. So why is Satan and the angels supposed to bow down to Adam and not everything else, right? This is being given as something that distinguishes Adam from the rest of creation. You're supposed to have bowed down to Adam because I created him with my 2 hands, right? And when you go to the hadith, many of those hadith I was talking about before, remember I mentioned the hadith that talk about seeing Allah on the day of resurrection. He's going to shapeshift. He's going to be like a like a divine tranny or whatever. I don't know what you call it. He's appearing in different forms and transitioning, right? He's transitioning, and then he's going to eventually appear to them in his true form, which they'll recognize because they've got a mental picture of it, according to the hadith, according to Alonso's hadiths. He's going to appear to them in his true form, and they're going to recognize him. But in those hadiths, along with those, it's talking about the day of resurrection. And it says that the people are going to be out there. Think about how modest this deity is, by the way, who's apparently not, it's beneath him to be where two people might be having relations, right? He couldn't enter into our world or he couldn't be omnipresent either, according to many Muslims, because that would mean he'd be in the bathroom or he'd be in your bedroom. If you're married when, you're having relations, all these things can't be, right? Well, everybody's going to be standing there naked on the day of resurrection. So men and women and young girls. And so Muhammad might like that part of it, right? Young girls, they're all naked, but they're all going to be there naked. I wonder if Alonzo is here just because he gets to hear stuff like this. I wouldn't put it past him. His prophet was the model of conduct. So Alonzo might like this idea. He might say, put me on the section that's nearest to the children on that day. I don't know. Anyways, so all these people are going to be naked on that day, and Allah's going to appear eventually, right? So you're going to see all these naked people. Apparently, he doesn't have a problem with people being naked. I don't know why they pretend it precludes him being omnipresent or becoming incarnate or whatever. Anyways, all that's an aside. This day is going to last for 50,000 years, and so people are going to become anxious over time. The sun's going to be beating down on them, and they're going to want somebody that will hurry the day along so they could get through this whole process. And they're going to seek out who's the best person that we can seek out to intercede between us and Allah. And the first person that comes to mind is Adam. And why do they choose Adam? They choose Adam because they say Allah created you with his own two hands. So therefore, he'll hear you, right? They don't assume he's going to hear them. He's going to hear Adam because Allah created Adam with his own two hands. Now, Adam turns people away from him because he says, I sinned against my Lord and he's angry with me. Don't come to me. Go to Noah. And then Noah's going to say, don't come to me. I sinned. Go to Abraham. And Abraham's going to say, go to David or Moses. Moses is going to say, go to David. And David's going to say, go to Jesus. Jesus is going to say, go to Muhammad. Now, the reason all these other figures are important is because each person is chosen because there's something distinguishing about each person, right? The reason they're told to go to Moses or to Abraham is because Abraham was called the friend of God. So they think he'll hear Abraham. The reason they go to Moses is because Allah spoke to Moses directly and gave him the Torah, which he wrote with his own hand, right? The reason they are turned to David is because he was a man after God's own heart. The reason they're turned to Jesus is because he's Allah's word, right? And a spirit from him. Now, the reason this is all interesting then is because you're given the special distinguishing features of these figures. What is it that stands out in the case of Adam? That he was made with Allah's hands. What is it that stands out in the case of Moses? That he had the Torah written with Allah's hands. In fact, there's another hadith that says Adam and Moses were debating with one another. Listen up, Alonzo. Adam and Moses were debating with one another. And it says that Adam got the better of Moses. Now, this is, I'm sure, only too sure this is picked up from some rabbinic source because it's got a kind of rabbinic flair to it. But anyways, it says that Moses happened upon Adam. So this is apparently their first introduction. And Moses said, are you that Adam that got us kicked out of paradise, even though Allah made you with his own two hands? And then Adam retorts, he said, are you that Moses who got the Torah? That he goes, didn't it write my fate 40 years before I was born, or 40 years before I was made? So what he's saying is, how can you blame me for something that was already written for me before it happened, right? But there's another version of that hadith that makes even more sense. It gives us more detail. Moses pointed to Adam and said, you sinned even though Allah made you with his own two hands. And then Adam said, are you that Moses to whom Allah gave the Torah that he wrote with his own two hands and included my fate 40 years before I was even born? So both of them are pointing to the fact that they had some special benefit from the hands of Allah somehow. And I could go on and on with one more thing from the sources, because I told you, I mean, they're so full, and you can't just figurativize this, right? If that's a legitimate term, I can make up my own terms, right? Muslims are making up deities. In the Quran, in Surah 7, there's this allusion to something that's stated more fully in the hadith, where it refers to Adam's descendants being taken out of Adam. Okay, before any of us were born, we were in Adam, and Allah, according to the hadith, stroked Adam's back with his right hand. Okay, so this is the first back rub in history. Allah was the first masseuse. Okay, at Allah's little masseuse parlor, he now this is done by mostly Oriental people. Anyways, at Allah's parlor, he strokes Adam's back, gives him a divine back rub. He likes people's backs, by the way. He touched Muhammad's back. Muhammad felt his ice. I wonder how Adam felt during this. Can you imagine? I mean, that icy touch. Anyways, so Iceman here in the sky, he touches Adam's back, he strokes it, and he brings out Adam's descendants. Now think about this. Why do you think if Allah wants to bring the main thing here is that he's using his hand, right? It's another reference to Allah's hand. But there's a side point here. Why do you think Allah stroked Adam's back in order to get his progeny out from him? You have to engage in a little Quranic logic here.
Could it be because the sperm comes from between the backbone and the rib?
That's it. That's it. So Allah, true to himself, thinks that that's where semen comes from. So he's stroking Adam's back, right? So, I mean, all these references to Allah's hands, it's clear that these are literal hands. Allah's doing some real things with these hands. In fact, we're even told that this is not just my reasoning that these are distinguishing things that set Adam apart or Moses apart. It says in various hadiths, it says Allah only created 3 things directly with his own hands. And some sources will say 4. So it's 3 or 4. We'll give Muhammad a pass. He doesn't know whether the world was created in 6 or 8 days, and there are other mathematical he doesn't know how to divide the inheritance. Allah's not good at math, so we'll give him a pass here. So it's 3 or 4 things. Allah forgot which one was not really part of that. But anyways, it says that he created Adam directly with his hands. He wrote the Torah for Moses with his hands, and he planted the trees of the Garden of Eden with his own hands. And then I think the 4th thing is the throne, that he made the throne. That's up for grabs, though. Not like his loins, but it is up for grabs.
I think we actually accidentally uncovered, I think the reason why Allah doesn't have a son. I think going back to that conversation, I think with this whole thing with Adam, him stroking his back and taking the semen, actually giving Adam the first hand job in history, Allah's gay. Right. That's why. That's why. He doesn't have a woman because he's just gay, and obviously he's enjoying himself with Adam there.
Alonso here says Anthony can't debate real positions. First of all, I debated Shabir on this, but secondly, Alonso, you've been invited more than once to engage. So if you're going to say that, you ought to be willing to talk. Otherwise, you give the lie to your own claim while making it.
And you know what? I will even do this right now, Alonso. There. I put the link to the studio in the live chat. So if you can get the amount of balls that your God obviously has and come on here, we can have a discussion right here, right now. We're open to it. I don't know if you'll step up. I have my doubts, just a little bit, but we'll give you the opportunity at least. So that's there for you. All you got to do is click, put your camera in, and come join us.
So even just microphone.
Yeah, we'll just take even just the microphone by itself.
Oh yeah, we know that Muslims don't like being seen. In fact, the Islamic sources speak of Allah just like a good hijabi. He is veiled. It's true.
With light, which brings up a whole nother issue. So Allah can be limited by light. So that's just this unlimited, all-powerful God can be limited by his own creation.
So is Alonso here saying two debates right now, one on the Trinity, one on Tawhid? Or is he simply pointing out the history that I've debated Muslims on the Trinity and on Tawhid, which gives the lie again to his own claim that Anthony won't debate actual positions. I debated your false God against Shabir Ali and other Muslims. That's just one among others. And I also have defended the Trinity against Muslims.
I mean, we're just having a nice conversation here. So, I mean, if he wants to
Look,
give his opinion.
Alonso says, Rogers has never debated the Trinity.
Okay.
It's not true, but you could always you can be the first, Alonso. You can be the first. What a funny guy.
Just come on up right there. Just gave you the link again. No reason to say we don't. So we're giving you the opportunity right there.
Now, there's another funny. So he says, you haven't debated the Trinity. You were even too scared to defend the Trinity with Dale Tuggy. Genius. I debated Dale Tuggy too. I debated Shabir Ali and I've debated Dale Tuggy. Want to name another person I've debated the Trinity?
There's a certain point where you should not speak anymore.
I told you,
just
the guy,
keep putting your foot in the mouth.
The guy insists that two brain cells are too much to exert at the same time. He has never debated his position, always running to scripture and hiding behind. Oh, well, okay. If that's what we're calling it, hiding behind scripture.
I'm sorry. So you're not supposed to use scripture in a debate? This is news.
So he doesn't even believe in his God, right? It says in the Quran, it says, bring your evidence if you're truthful, right? Meaning bring the textual support for your position. That's how it's done, Alonso, just so you know. But
well,
even if you
go ahead.
Even if you wanted to pretend this was some autonomous affair, that we defend the doctrine of the triune God independently of scripture, something I'd never even, try to do. The fact is that I have no question, Alonso. I could easily route you right now off the cuff. Just doing it by conceding, just saying, okay, I'll put two arms behind my back, right? He hides behind scripture.
That wasn't our topic for the day. You haven't prepared for it. But yet we're inviting him to come along right now and show us as liars if he or she can, which I'm still thinking it's actually a she. That's why I don't think she ever joins anything.
Too Many Marys says, I'm glad you admit the scripture teaches Trinity.
That's why you keep running to the scripture. Yeah. Can't use your actual sources.
Oh, poor Alonso. I had a friend when I was younger that was named Alonso. It'd be funny if that was him, but that guy was not slow.
I think we've learned quite a bit. I mean, we've gone through multiple issues. We've touched on multiple heresies within the Quran and the Hadith. How Allah's body parts really do just, according to its own sources, defeat the concept that Allah is putting forth. That if he has these eternal body parts, why do they get destroyed at the end? If Allah made Adam with his own two hands, and again, that's the main thing posed against Satan, was he wasn't willing to worship created being, which again, any Muslim nowadays would say, of course, that would be shirk. But it's Allah, so he can do whatever he wants. So there have been multiple issues that we've pulled up. And again, guys, now's the time.
Yeah, so he started off by asking, can I ask a question? Watch how he will dodge the question. I guess this is his
question to be dodged.
Now watch me answer it and then watch him pretend like I didn't. So what he's asking is if this is something that's optional, if it's contingent on a free act of God's will. That is, was it possible for the Father not to beget the Son? but he's assuming all sorts of things here that I just don't, and I don't think any Christian should. There are certain things that are true about God and are necessary aspects of his being, right? When we say that God is truthful, he can't be untruthful, right? And what he's trying to do is work this idea into a corner, right? So if I say God can't do that, I'm saying God can't do something. But Scripture is explicit. There are things God can't do, not because he's not all powerful, but because he has a certain character. He has a certain nature. Unlike the God of Islam, that's arbitrary and can change his mind depending on what side of the bed he wakes up on, whether he likes alcohol today or not, whether he wants people swearing by other things or not. But he changes his mind constantly, whether he wants his followers to have only 4 and his prophet to have more, whatever it may be, whether he likes adoption or not. Again, it's all mood swings. The God of the Bible has a definite character. He can't lie. Paul told Timothy that. Timothy already knew it, but Paul said it. God can't deny himself. Another thing Paul tells Timothy. God can't change. So there are all sorts of things that are necessary to God as God. And one of the things that is necessary to God's very identity is the begetting of the Son. So it is not a contingent thing that, God could have chosen to do otherwise. So notice Alonzo answered your question, answered it directly, answered it happily. Now you're not going to change tune. You're going to continue to pretend Anthony runs from questions. Anthony wants debate. Anthony,
On top of this is coming from a very dishonest place from his own position, because he would admit that there's nothing that God can't do. So although he's trying to trap you in this, Allah would fall into the same trap. So his same point would be used against Allah himself.
But way better, yeah. Because there's lots of things that...
So can a human father do something Allah can't do?
Mm-hmm. Well, we could also ask, is the Quran itself, as Allah's eternal speech, something that he could have chosen? He says, so see, this means the Father has no... That's not what it means. It means that God has a definite nature. It's that God who exercises his will, but there are things that are true of his nature that aren't contingent on acts of will. That's even true Islamically. This guy pretends to know Islamic theology, and he's here saying other people don't. Even in Islamic theology, it's understood that there are certain things that are true of Allah as to his nature, and his volition, his will, is an expression of that nature. If you deny that, then your God is utterly arbitrary. He's a purely volitional being and utterly unpredictable and unreliable, right? The very reason that we can depend as Christians upon God is because when he speaks as the God of truth. God can't choose not to be true. That's who he is. That's what he is by nature. And so truth is an essential aspect of his being, and it's reflected in his free decisions. Similarly, the Son is an eternal Son. He's eternally begotten of the Father. That's not an act of some free choice. It's rather a essential aspect of God's being. So the only way you can object to this observation is if you make Allah purely volitional, which ends up undermining any ability to trust Allah. In fact, I think there is some grounds for that in Islam. That's why you have, for example, even Abu Bakr not trusting the promise of Allah that he would enter paradise, right? Abu Bakr said, even if I had 1 foot in paradise, I still wouldn't feel myself safe from Allah's deception. He realizes that Allah is a fickle, changeable being, that he could just freely will the next day to go back on his promise, because his nature is not immutably holy, immutably truth, immutably good, and so forth.
And I mean, he's bipolar, very clearly bipolar, where you'll just switch, Allah will just switch back and forth, and there's no indication, no way of trusting.
He's just repeating himself now.
Oh, yeah. He just will. He won't take us up on our offer of joining us.
Rogers runs to Islam for fallacies. Yeah, there's a whole treasure trove of things to use there as analogies, right?
Yep.
No, but it's pretty standard when you want to illustrate what would be fallacious, what is problematic, to look to something that embodies that sort of thing. And yeah, we've got that in Islam, definitely. So the God of the Bible, in contrast to the God of Islam, has a nature that's definite. It's immutable. It doesn't change. It's holy. It's good. It's true. And his choices reflect that nature. And it's good that things are that way, because for that reason, we can trust God's word. We know that he doesn't change. And that's just not true in Islam. In Islam, you've got a being that, if we follow out the implications of what Alonso's saying here, a being that's fickle and arbitrary, can change his mind from one day to the next, does change his mind, can say something, can give out a revelation, but then rescind it later. Okay, that's not the God of the Bible. It's not the God of the prophets or the apostles. It is the God of people, though, that want to be next to the children on the day of resurrection, because, well, we already covered that.
Well, it still boggles my mind, the whole concept of abrogation. So this is, one second here, visual reference, not the page, just the book. So this here is supposed to be Allah's word. It's supposed to have been with him for all eternity. The eternal words of Allah here.
It's a pretty clean copy for as old as it is.
Yep, fantastic. I mean, this is pristine. Obviously, completely preserved by Allah in every way, shape, or form.
Bad binding,
yes.
I'm sure.
But yet Allah has to change his words periodically, which doesn't make any sense. Because if they were always there, then there would have been no need to change them. The only way it would make sense is if this is something that is being made up as it goes along, and then he can alter it as need be. But then that wouldn't be eternal. So I know this was a very early argument back and forth within the Muslim community itself, asking the question is if this is eternal or not. And eventually the ones who are arguing that it was eternal won out eventually. But they pointed out some good points about it. If it's eternal, then it's always been with Allah. Therefore, as we pointed out earlier, you can now have two entities, but actually a lot more if you read the hadith.
Yeah, so I want to answer this one more time so Alonso has no excuse for lying. So he's just repeated the thing again, which I've already addressed. But I understand, Alonso's not our quickest Muslim. So he's claiming that if we say that the begetting of the Son is not a matter of some arbitrary decision or a free decision, then God doesn't make free decisions. That's just fallacious. If I do something necessarily in some case because I can't avoid it, that's in my nature, it doesn't mean I don't make any free decisions, right? For example, there are certain aspects of my nature that are involuntary. My heart's beating, right? I can't just will it not to beat. That's just true of my nature, my makeup, right? That's not a free decision. It doesn't follow. In fact, it's a logical howler. It's a hasty generalization to say if there's something that is an involuntary act, well, then every act that I do is involuntary, right? Right now, I'm raising my hand, right? It's clearly a act of free decision, even if not everything I do is a matter of free decision, okay? So it's just logically fallacious. I mean, it's a logical howler. I'm sure you haven't taken a single logic course saying stuff like that. When I say that God acts in accordance with his nature, okay, this is standard theism. This is why Islam looks utterly ridiculous in any philosophical context, because you got Muslims reasoning like this. If you think your God has any nature at all, any being, well, then he has certain qualities that are descriptive of that being, and all of his free decisions are then out of that being. It's reflective of that being. But those things themselves are not results, right? They're not things that God didn't choose to be omniscient, right? God didn't choose to, be all powerful. I mean, God is eternal. There's no choice to be made with respect to these things, right? So that it doesn't follow from that, though, that God didn't choose to create. That's just logically fallacious. And so you need to go back to the drawing board, Alonso. Now, but let's go back to this, because I've answered it with respect to Christianity. But if we're talking about Islam now, you've got this huge problem. If your God is really able to just freely choose anything, even what's going to be true of his nature, well, then your God has no fixed character. And we can't believe your God. We can't trust your God. We can't rely on him. He's just as likely to approve of having a child bride one day and condemning it the next, right? He's just as likely to approve of somebody mistreating a blind man one day and not the next. He's just as likely to like adoption or taking the wife of one's adopted son one day and not the next. Right? And that's why we see in the Quran Allah acting in just this precarious way. Your God is arbitrary and fickle, not the kind of being you want to try and dance with. He'll step all over your toes. He can't stand still. I don't even know why these people argue.
Okay. Alonzo, since you're not willing to step up, I went ahead and opened it up to anyone else that has questions. Guys, come on up. We'll talk, have a discussion. We have a bit longer. I'm not sure, Anthony, how long you have set aside for this. If we've got a few minutes, we'll see if anyone has any good questions about the topic or maybe about the Trinity.
Yeah, I'm open for a few questions. Other than that,
because unless we just want to go through the source after source after source after source, and there is just so many on this that it becomes quickly overwhelming. Again, these are all literal references to Allah's face, Allah's hands, Allah's shins,
Allah's gonads,
his
Allah's
skin,
multiple eyes, 2 right hands.
This monstrosity you call a god. I mean, this would make some of the Hindu gods run in fear, because at least they have a complete form.
RJ says Allah is Samad. So see, RJ knows the meaning of Samad. That's the term that means solid in Surah 112. In fact, I mentioned this is the strongest meaning if you follow the various options presented by Al-Tabari, right? There's a chain going back to Muhammad saying this is the meaning. There's also all these other sources that use the word in precisely that way. But if you look at the translations, if you go to islamawaken.com, for example, it'll give you like 50 translations of the Quran. And some of those translations will actually render it as solid. So, for example, Bijan Moinian says it means solid. Now, one could wish that Alonzo's arguments were solid, but at least his deity supposedly is.
Now, we do have a call-in. So
all right.
Let's go ahead and pull them up and see if they've got a good question for us to...
Got a good smile.
Wrestle with.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Happy.
Yes.
I'm always happy. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a Christian, and so and I also don't have a particular question, but I think I've listened to a few a few Christian polemics on about Islam, and I think we often look at the Islam a bit in the wrong way. I think it's more like a spell book, like the Quran and everything, and I also think that it's all about reciting and doing things the proper way, and not about understanding and drawing connections. Like, I think, who is the guy again who said there are holes in the narratives?
Yasser Qadi?
Yes, he also said, like, there is a red line we don't cross over. We don't question stuff. We just have to believe in Muhammad and what he said. So it's like trying to understand how the two hands are connected to each other is a bit of a wrong approach. Would you agree with that?
Well, so one thing is Yasser Qadi believes Allah has all these parts. So he's one of those Muslims, right, that takes these things literally. I don't necessarily fault Muslims for trying to be modest with respect to their sources and not go beyond them, right? So trying to connect, say, Allah's foot bone to his shin bone to his knee or whatever, it would be a precarious thing to affirm anything for God that he hasn't given us warrant to affirm. Problem is that this is all ridiculous, right? So my problem has more to do with the sources that they're sticking to than the fact that they're not willing to make inferences. Although I do think inferences are inescapable. Like they're still, even though they try to be very strict and not go beyond what the sources explicitly say, there's still times when they do and have to make inferences. You just can't avoid it. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a sense in which it's true that the Quran, well, I mean, it certainly puts out its hand. It doesn't like people asking questions, right? It doesn't like, Muhammad got extremely angry when people ask questions. So I mean, I think there's sense it imposes limits on, in fact, the constant refrain of Muslims is bila khaif, right? Which means without saying how or without asking how. So they'll say Allah has a face, but we don't ask how. He has hands, but we don't ask how. So we just affirm them and leave it at that.
You know, that is a stark difference between the Bible and the Quran. Because in the Bible, we're
Jesus
told
also is, Jesus is logos, and Allah is more like the will. So as long as he wills it, it's all right. And in Christianity, it actually has to make sense. And that's, I think, a huge difference. And as Christians, we living in a Christian civilization or post-Christian civilization, we often want to use logos to understand other religions. And I'm not sure how much that applies to Islam.
Well, I definitely look at Islam and the history of Islam and Christianity and look at what the results have been. Christianity gave birth to the scientific movement. The scientific method is based off of Christian principles, being able to investigate a world that God has created. In Islam, again, you don't have that questioning. As to this being a magic book or having parallels to polytheistic books of magic or sorcery, there's a lot of that to it. A lot of the polytheistic traditions and beliefs would be that you do something that makes a god do X. You don't have to look very far for that in Islam. Just look at all of Muhammad Hijab's videos, where he always starts it off with, hey, give me money. That way Allah can bless you. It's a trade-off. It's always a trade. It's you do good for Allah, then Allah will do good for you. In Christianity, it's God did good for you because you were incapable of doing good. So again, another stark contrast between the two.
I think I also have another reason why I think it's a spell book. I once had a conversation with a Muslim in the comments, and then I asked him, why are there 7 recitations of the Quran? And then he said it's for accessibility reasons. And then I asked him, why is only the Arabic Quran valid? And he also, why did Uthman destroy all the other Qurans? And then he said that is also for accessibility reasons. And I think it's not about accessibility doesn't mean us understanding it better. It means the Muslims being better at reciting it. So during the time of Muhammad, it was easier to recite in your own dialect, but now that it is international, basically, it is easier to learn just one Quran, to recite one Quran, instead of seven different ones. So it's not about understanding it, but about basically saying the spells.
Well, yeah, you see that in a lot of, again, going back to polytheism and witchcraft, you see that a lot in that sort of culture where it is the exact incantation you need to repeat in order to get the thing or cause the deity to do what you want. It is the recitation, being able to say it exactly the way it's supposed to be done And again, that is a master-slave relationship where the god's just serving you based upon your actions, where in the Bible, it's a relationship. So it brings it to a different level in between the two. So there are definitely a lot of parallels between witchcraft and Islam, more than they would like to admit.
Yeah.
So hope he answered your questions. I don't see any other callers in, so that's fantastic.
No, it wasn't really about. It's more like bringing my thoughts to some other people to hear what they say about it, like
Sure.
testing the waters.
No, that's the point of having these conversations, so we can talk about, we can engage with it, we can think it through together. Each one of us has our own skill set that we bring to the table, our own pasts and all of our expertise.
Yeah.
So, Alonzo, are you still messing around? I mean, here we got a caller. He's willing to step up, willing to do everything. I mean, was it that complicated to get access to this stream?
No.
There, see? Very simple. Very easy. Sure, if you've got a question, come on up, ask. We've got a little bit more that we can spend on questions.
Why is this name Skype?
I don't know.
That's an
Just got
interesting.
the whole Skype icon and everything.
Bring him up.
So we will see.
Yeah, and Anthony, I appreciate all your videos you're doing. There.
Oh, thank you.
I respect your knowledge.
Oh, I hope it's beneficial. I hope people grow from it.
Yeah.
Are you a former Muslim or always been a
No.
Christian or?
I grew up being a Christian, and I don't remember ever converting. Like I was just
Okay.
always a Christian.
Yeah, I know that situation, not personally, but I mean, I know people that can say that. It's like I had one guy that used to tell me, it's like somebody asking me, when did I first love my mother? And he'd say, I don't remember when. I just always have loved my mother, right? And
Yeah.
he grew up in a household where he knew Christ and just always knew him. And that's the blessed thing. I remember David Wood one time, he said that somebody told him something like, he asked the guy his testimony, and the guy said, he says, I don't have a very flashy testimony like you guys or whatever. I just always been a Christian. And David says, what do you mean you don't have a flashy testimony? He says, any idiot can fall down a mountain, or fall down a hill. So from David's perspective, it was like, this is far more impressive to me as a guy who had this terrible past. Far more impressive to me to hear that this person has been a believer his whole life. So, yeah, that's a blessed thing.
Lonzo says I should invite him as an expert in Christianity.
We've invited you, Alonzo.
You've been invited most of the stream. You can come on. It's not complicated.
He won't do it. I think we know. This is not a new thing with Alonzo, right? I mean, this is
no. That's the main. Even me just inviting him, I already knew he's not going to step up. I knew he can't. Oh, he can't act now. Oh, isn't that convenient?
He's never been able. He's never been able to. Oh no,
he can spend hours on here talking.
I think he's still stuck on his bad logic. When he says he can't act now, he's saying God can't act unless God's nature is a matter of his free decision. Free in the sense that, he could have chosen otherwise. Like God could have chosen to be ignorant, right? So apparently Allah has the freedom to be ignorant, right? Allah has the freedom to be evil. Allah has the freedom to be the devil. Allah has the that's in his mind. If there's anything that's necessarily true of Allah, then he can't be free, right? So when I say the Son is necessarily of the Father, he's eternally begotten of the Father, in his mind that precludes any free act beside that. Well, then it follows, right? If Allah can't be free unless everything that's true of him is a matter of free or voluntary decision, then Allah can be Satan, he can be a donkey, He can approve of child, pedophilia and all that. Oh, I'm sorry, he did do that, right? He is free to do that. We know that already. I didn't use a other example. I should have.
He can.
I thought
Allah is limited in something. He can only do what makes him look good in Muslim eyes. So
yeah.
I think that's a limit.
I thought the Jewish person was coming up.
Come on, bud. You can just jump on with us. You're right here.
So, Islamophobia. Well, at least the problem usually is these people use the word Islamophobia, but they mean they're trying to use that like they're saying we're Muslim phobic, right? Obviously, the religion is patently false. So is post-Christian apostate Talmudic Judaism. Both are patently false. Nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with the prophets, the apostles. But we oppose the religion. It doesn't mean that we are opposing it out of hatred for Muslims, right? Oh, you guys aren't sincere, right?
Too much. So hey, can I jump on?
Wait a minute. So there's Islamophobia, right? He's accusing us of being Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, and then he calls us insincere. So just notice before, it's probably a good thing he had to come on. He's already slandered us like 3 times, right? Anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, and insincere.
So what? You just want me to tell him no to not come on?
No, he should still come on because we're usually better than the caricatures that are made of us. But
his original question was, "Hey, I'm a Jew. Can I come on?" Was he expecting me to tell him no? Because now he's kind of like, I'm getting called out. I need to come on because I was told, come on.
Yeah,
but now he says we're insincere.
Yeah, but there's nothing obviously problematic if we disagree with what Muhammad as a false prophet taught. That's entirely legitimate. In fact, if he wants to pretend to be Jewish, he needs to recognize just how utterly Jewish that is. It's the prophets of Israel who started this in the sense of lambasting the buffoonery of false worship. The God of the Bible abominates people that misrepresent him or people that seek out false deities, people who engage in foolish acts of idolatry. All of this is lampooned in the prophets. You can't read prophets like Isaiah without seeing this sort of thing, right? Just read that section of Isaiah, sometimes called the trial of the gods, Isaiah 40 through 55. Throughout that section, Allah mercilessly ridicules pagan deities, right? Mercilessly. And in fact, even post-Christian writings, Talmudic writings, or post-Jewish writings like the Talmud, they carry on this tradition, right? If you want to read scathing, chastising words against idolatry, read the Talmud. It's thick. It's pretty thick, but starting with Isaiah, he says, the pagans, they go out into the forest, they seek out the right tree, right? They cut it down, right? And then they're tired, right? they get tired in the process. The whole point you're supposed to be seeing all along the way is the inconsistency of this. So this person's going to make this God, and he gets fatigued in the process. So this God is the result of human labor that's terminating in fatigue, right? So the source of this almighty deity is human weakness. Well, anyways, going along, it says they take half of the wood and make a deity, and then they bow down to it and say, "You made me." So they make it and then turn around and worship it as that which made them. Another act of foolishness. And then it says they take the other half of the wood and use it to make a fire. So the same thing that the deity was just made out of is now being used as fuel for the fire. I mean, the level of sarcasm here is so thick, right? It takes a special sort of person to miss it. So for the life of me, I don't get how that sort of thing can be found in the Bible, and then somebody feigning Jewish belief would have a problem with somebody, making these observations about Islam.
Well, I get that all the time.
Anthony, I have a question about sometimes when I read in the New Testament where they say this is a fulfillment of a prophecy, and then they refer to the Old Testament, and then I read it, then I don't really see how that was a prophecy. And for me, it's the way I take it currently is I just assume like they use a different type of thinking. Like I'm an engineer, I do it I think in the way engineers do, and historians think in an entirely different way. And so sometimes they say things which are completely correct, but because I have the wrong way of thinking, I don't understand it. And I think when the for example, this is especially true in the letter to the Hebrews. There they also do like refer to the Old Testament in a way which I don't really, which doesn't make sense to me. And my question is, how would you recommend that I can learn how they thought and why they think that those prophecies are interpreted in the way they do?
Yeah.
Do you understand my question?
Yeah. So there's many reasons why one might look at the statement in the a statement in the New Testament about something being fulfilled, and not seeing how that is a right application. Sometimes it's because when the Old Testament is translated in our current Bibles from Hebrew into English, it's being translated from the Masoretic text. So the Masoretic text is maybe you know this, I don't know, but when the Old Testament was written, it was written in all consonants, right?
Yeah.
In Arabic, it's the same thing. When the Quran was written, it was written in all consonants. A native Hebrew speaker, reader, just as a native Arabic speaker, reader, could look at the text and understand the intended vowel points or the intended vowel sounds, right? It's kind of like if you ever see, you look at a license plate and it says something. In order to get it to fit on a license plate, they've got to take out certain letters, right? But if you know the language, you know what letters belong in those spaces. You know what I'm talking about on a license plate? Like if you saw, let's see, if you say, if I put JSS LVS and then a U, what do you think that spells? JSS LVS U. In fact, let me show you it. I'll put it on my phone so it looks easier.
By the way, I'm from Switzerland, so English is my second language, and there are way fewer people here.
Hold on.
So
you can also think of it as like in texting, BRB.
Yeah.
I
know. I know what you want to say.
Look at that. Watch this. So, people in the comment section, what do you think that I'm trying to say with that? This isn't a perfect analogy, but it's a pretty decent one, I think. Mm-hmm. What do you guys think that's? Do you have an idea, your brother in Christ?
Oh, I definitely do. And
there it is. See, Ella got it.
She has it.
Jesus loves you, right? So if we were more used to writing that way, it would be even quicker for most people. Mm-hmm. Well, that's how the Hebrews wrote. So they wrote in all consonants. Normally, it's very easy to tell what vowel sounds are intended. Every once in a while, though, there would be some ambiguity where certain vowels can be added that could make the sense different, right? It wouldn't normally be the case. In most cases, it could only be one set of vowels that's going to properly contextually fit there. Well, what happens is after the time of Christ, the Masoretes who preserved the consonantal text, my computer did its thing again. The Masoretes who preserved the consonantal text, they included vowel pointings, and often those vowel pointings were quite strained or forced in trying to go a different direction with the meaning so that it wouldn't point to the Messiah. This is pretty well known. It's not just a Christian, slander or something like that. This is pretty well known, and it's demonstrable. So as an example, if we have translations by Jews of the Old Testament that precede the Talmudic or the post-Christian Masoretes, right? So in Psalm 22, there's a statement if you read the consonantal text, the way you would naturally read it is as it were saying, they've pierced my hands and my feet, right? If you read the Masoretic version of this, where it has these vowel pointings that they added afterwards, it says, like a lion, my hands and my feet. Now in Hebrew, this is just gibberish. It doesn't make any sense. They when they translate it into English, it might seem like it makes a little more sense, but it's because they're playing games with even the Masoretic text, because the Masoretic text is just gibberish at that point. It's the same thing at Psalm 110:3. They've added vowel pointings that don't make sense in the context because they couldn't add anything there that would obscure the Messianic reading that also made sense. But when you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, which predate the Masoretes, or other ancient translations, they all read it just the way Christians would read it, just the way any Jew would naturally read the consonantal text, right? So my point here is that in a case like this, the ancient reading reflects a Christian messianic understanding, not the later anti-messianic rabbinic understanding. That's one kind of difference between the New Testament application and the Old Testament prediction. Another thing is that sometimes the New Testament writers are quoting something that's historical, and they're using it as if it were eschatological. And one example is, and I'll let this be my last example, and then I'll recommend something to you, because there's a lot more with this, and I don't want to go off on it for too long. But Hosea 11:1 is cited by Matthew in Matthew 2, right? Hosea says, "Out of Egypt I called my son," right? That Matthew cites that in he says 99% of the church fathers didn't know Hebrew. That's another topic for another time, Alonzo. But Jerome did, didn't he? Huh? There's one. Origen did. Huh? There's two. I can go on, but we'll stop there. But I would say, yeah, that most eventually were Gentile Greek speakers, but they had the Old Testament translated into Greek by Jews, and it was a very good, reliable translation. So that's hardly problematic. Anyways, the statement in Hosea 11:1, if you go back, well, the context in Matthew 2, it's talking about how Jesus is taken out of Israel and goes down into Egypt, right? Remember, Herod tries to kill the children to get at the Messiah. And so Joseph is warned to take Jesus down into Egypt with Mary, right? You know the occasion. And Matthew cites Hosea 11:1 and says, this is the fulfillment. Out of Egypt I called my son. When you go back to Hosea 11, Hosea is referring to the Exodus. The son there is referring to Israel. And so it's referring to a past event, namely God taking this corporate entity out of Egypt at the Exodus. And so this is an example where some people would say Matthew's misapplying a text. It's not a prediction about an individual, but about the nation. It's not a future prophecy, but a past occurrence. Matthew is using it entirely opposite of its original meaning. However, and this kind of exactly gets into what you were talking about, how they approach things differently. The Old Testament itself teaches that God was foreshadowing what he was going to do in the person of the Messiah by means of the nation of Israel, among others. There were other types and shadows of the Messiah, but Israel was a foremost type of the coming Messiah. And here's an example of what I mean. In Numbers 22, Balaam refers back to the Exodus from Egypt, and he says, out of Egypt, God brought his son. This is what Hosea is echoing, right? And he refers to it in the past tense. This is something God did. But then later in chapter 24, he shifts and now starts speaking about the future. And instead of speaking of the people in the context of Numbers 22, where he says, out of Egypt I called my son, he then switches to the plural. So it's clear that this is it's a corporate entity that he's referring to, right? But in Numbers 24, he switches to using the singular throughout, and it's put in the future, and it says, out of Egypt he will bring his son. So it's using the historical exodus of the nation as a type of the coming future Davidic ruler. In fact, if you read the whole prophecy there, it's clear that he's talking about the Messiah. Right? In fact, I'll pull it up just so it doesn't sound like I'm just making this up.
No, we do have another caller after this, so this will be the last question, and then we'll switch to Christ alone.
Okay.
Will be the
So
next caller. Just let you know you're up next.
This is Numbers 24. Balaam lifted up his eyes, saw Israel camping tribe by tribe. The Spirit of God came upon him. He took up his discourse and said, the oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is open, the oracle of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down, yet having his eyes uncovered. Now note this. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens beside the river. Water will flow from his buckets. So it switches to the singular, and it's in the future, right? Will flow from his buckets. His seed will be by many waters. His king shall be higher than Gog, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God will bring him out of Egypt. He is for him like the horns of the wild ox. And then it says in verse 9, he couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him? Now, if you are listening to that carefully and have read the previous scriptures prior to Numbers 24, you'll know that this language is used for the Messiah in Genesis 49, right? In Genesis 49, Jacob prophesies over his children, and of Judah, he says that from him will come the ruler, right? To him will belong the obedience of the people. And it says he's like a lion. He couches, he lies down, who dares to rouse him? Well, here in Numbers 24, Balaam takes the language that he had previously used about Israel and now begins to talk about the king that's going to come in the future. And he uses the same language to speak about the king. This is showing that there's a typological relationship between what God does with the nation and what God is going to do in the future through his son, the king, the Messiah. So when Matthew uses Hosea the way that he does, he's simply picking up on this typological relationship. There's a lot more to this that I could say, but what I would recommend is, this is just one of many books, but I think this one should be in everybody's library. It's the Moody Handbook on Messianic Prophecy. It's edited by Michael Rydelnik, who is a Jewish convert to Christianity. Not anti-Semitic, by the way. But that's what I'd recommend. They point out all of these things that it's not just that the apostles approached the Old Testament differently, but that they approached the Old Testament exactly how the Old Testament instructed them to approach it. Yes. Right? Because it would be a problem if the apostles just have their own hermeneutic, right? And that's not how it was, they're imposing this hermeneutic on it. The Old Testament itself teaches this way of reading it. So that's what the apostles are doing in some cases.
Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for your time. I'd recommend you go get that book.
Yes.
Sounds like a good read for you.
I have plenty of books already, but I will certainly add it to the list. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much for
answering my questions and for taking me on.
Yeah, we appreciate you stepping up.
Yeah. Yeah, have a nice continuing stream. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Christ alone. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Fantastic.
All right. I didn't have a question per se. I just wanted to say a few things. That first of all, Mr. Rogers, your knowledge is very, very impressive. I was a Muslim convert. I converted in the 90s. Before there were people like you or Sam Shimon or David Wood. I mean, you just took things just on, you couldn't really research like that. Internet was very, very nascent. And then somebody give you a VHS tape of Ahmadiyyat, and you just take what he says on pure faith, And plus, one of my friends, he converted as well, and he told a lot of things. I won't say that he lied to me as much as the things that he said were lies that he didn't realize, So there was no way to really fact check in those days. But years later, you end up going down the rabbit hole. The particular rabbit hole that I went down was the Salafi that you're just talking about. I was commenting in the chat a little earlier. What they call the Etheri is what you're referring to when you're talking about the Mujassima, where Allah has a body and he has eyes and he has feet, he has fingers, he walks, he jogs, and all of these types of things, smiles, all of these types of things that you'll see in all of the hadith. So your knowledge is very impressive. I only wish that there had been people like you before I converted to Islam. That way, I would have never wasted so much of my life and time in it. But it is what it is. But I just wanted to commend you guys on that.
Yeah, even though now there's more stuff that people can get access to, it's a shame. I see people sometimes saying they converted to Islam, and I'm thinking, did you even take the time to really study it, or did you just buckle at the first Muslim who told you as an example? What got me really interested in aspects pertaining to Islamic Aqidah and Tawheed and all this stuff was I would always hear people, and I read stuff on it, but then I would hear Muslims as part of the sales pitch saying Islam is simple and agreed upon and all this stuff, in contrast to the doctrine of the Trinity or the Incarnation. These are complex issues, and Christians are all in disagree and all that. But I remember
that's exactly what I was told. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I was told. But like I said, I couldn't just. There was no YouTube. There was no really any internet. It was barely. There was email.
Yeah,
but, like
now,
America Online or something.
Now there's all that, and people still, because somebody. I don't know if you know who Marlon Wilson is. He runs the Gospel True channel, but he asked me to go on his channel. I couldn't because I was busy, but he wanted to look at this. I guess some guy, I don't know who he is. His name is Sneeko.
Oh, yes. Guys like him and Anthony Tate are basically, in my opinion, changing teams. They're not changing out of, okay, this is a firm belief. This is where, y'all have all of this going on, and this other team doesn't. So let me change teams.
Yeah. Well, so I'm listening. I listened to a couple of videos of his, and I'm just thinking, this guy obviously didn't do very much study. He bought the rhetoric. He bought the propaganda because, I could pick up a book from Muslim scholar after Muslim scholar where they're all saying this is a complex issue. I mean, all sides. The Salafi, you mentioned the Athari Creed, the Maturidis, the Asharis, all these guys. I can pick up stuff. I have books by Hamza Yusuf, for example, where he talks about theology being like a pious act of squaring a circle, which is the classic way of describing a contradiction, right? Something can't be both a square and a circle, but he says that's what theology is. And he's talking about traditional Ashari theology. But just one person after another will talk about how these things are complicated. And yet the sales pitch is this is extremely simple. And I'm just thinking, this isn't even true. You guys aren't even but my point here was you were talking about how in your day there wasn't this stuff available, but now it is, and these people are just jumping on the Islamic bandwagon. And it's just, it's sort of, I don't know.
I mean, the good news is, other than, I like I said, I saw like this thing with Sneeko, and I saw Andrew Tate, obviously, but very, very shallow. And then, famous people are treated a little bit differently too. The rules are different for them. They don't have to, obey the rules the same way a regular person would, But, and like I said, they can just continue on being exactly the same person that they were, and that just wasn't the case back in the day. But I don't think, other than cases like that, I mean, you may know a little bit better. I still don't think that is that many people that convert. And even the ones that do convert, numbers say maybe 4 out of 5, they leave
Go
after
back.
a few
Yeah.
months.
Well, once they start actually looking into it and start realizing what it actually teaches and realize they've been sold a bunch of goods,
Yes.
yeah, it's quick turnover.
Yeah, I mean, because
Quote,
I was told it was one way of thinking, and everybody prays the same way, and all of this type of stuff. But you're about to say something?
I was just about to ask you, did you leave a comment on Eliso Elohim's channel? Because there was a comment very similar to what you just said. Well, not to your introduction of why you came on here. I was just curious.
I'm not sure. I may have.
Okay, that's no problem. Just real quick here, I would like to give you one other thing. I left my email in the private chat.
Okay.
Would you mind just grabbing that and getting contact with me afterwards?
Sure.
Because I'd like to talk a bit more about your personal, maybe even do a video with you if you're willing. Just talking about basically what you gave here, your personal experience, what the pitfalls were, and what led you out of that, if you feel comfortable enough with sharing that.
Oh,
Are you still there?
maybe he lost audio.
No. I just think that will be productive because I'm sure that this is a story that's pretty common with a lot of people. So he did rejoin. Under a different one. Did you hear my question?
It looked like I might be on here like 2 and 3 times. I'm having a problem.
You're good. Don't worry about it. I can take care of that.
Okay.
No issue.
I'm still on. Look like I'm still hearing an echo. Maybe I'm on twice now.
I've taken you off, so I hope not.
Okay.
So
right,
I just asked if you'd be willing to come on sometime and just talk about your experiences, why it was attractive, and what basically woke you up to it. I'm sure that your story is not uncommon, that there are plenty of people who have struggled with this or are currently struggling with it, and I think it would help them out.
Yeah. I can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I would. Can you look like because of the I lost your email.
I can repost it, no problem.
Because of my
technical. Over in the private
okay,
chat.
I got it. Okay,
Fantastic.
I'll send you an email probably in the next couple of days because tomorrow is Mother's Day. Yeah. By the way, I mean you got a new mother on your side too. Congratulations.
Yeah, we were a little preoccupied tomorrow. I do admit.
Just a little bit. Yeah, but yeah, I'd be glad to do that.
You want to come on and say goodbye? Because I'm about ready to wrap it up. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I know there is someone who is wanting to peek back in. Back over, peek back in. About ready to just close in prayer. Wrap up for today. I think Christ alone was our last call in, and I do need to get going. So here we go. So not a 8-hour live stream today, guys. I cut it a little short.
Well, as to my call in, Anthony, I know that we talked a while back about doing like an illustration of the body parts of Allah. I forget who it was, but very early on in this conversation, in the live chat, there was someone who was like raising a question about like the leg bones connected to like what? Or something like that.
The question.
And I was thinking, man, that would be like a really good spoof to do, especially like along with the illustration to do like that song, like the leg bones connected to the thigh bone or whatever, like, yeah, with the parts of Allah and just like have these like random things floating around. thought that'd be interesting.
Yeah, a leg bone connected
Yeah,
to
and
the,
you've probably seen you've probably seen my compilations with
Yeah,
Muslim scholars. I have one, at least one, on the body parts. So there's
yeah,
plenty of quotes right there. Like I spent, I don't know how much time. David, many people don't know this, but I mean, some of the times when he would do stuff in a video, he already had the idea. He was familiar with Muslims making this claim or writings where it says it, but he wanted video of certain things, because if you're doing a video, you want something they can see, and it's better if it's not just printed words, right?
yeah,
So he would ask me, hey, you know where anybody says this, like it says this in the hadith, you know where a Muslim is actually talking about this? And I would gather, because I spent hours and hours and hours listening to these guys to make all these different compilations. So I made the one with where's Allah? So he's you've got all these Muslim scholars debating whether he's above the seven heavens, whether he's on the throne, over the throne,
yeah,
what have you. And but I have one on all the parts of Allah.
yeah.
I'm
You
sure
did the with the real Allah, please stand up or whatever.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, that's what it was called. Yeah. It made me think of that song where
yeah. No, I liked your little picture you had too for that, the little like gremlin thing.
Yeah, I don't remember. Oh, I know why I chose the gremlin. I'm thinking, why did I choose the gremlin? It's because I had a clip from Mufti Abu Layth where he's making fun, even though he's a Muslim, he's making fun of the Salafis.
Yeah,
And he says their God sounds like a gremlin, right? Because he's like freakish sounding, so yeah, that's why I chose the gremlin. I had to take off one of his legs because I didn't know if Allah has another leg. And I know I was fudging, connecting these parts, but, well, what else? What am I going to do? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's more like a Mr. Potato. You could use a Mr. Potato Head in the video. If you're going to appear in the video, you could always, or you could do it like, how they do the claymations where they move the way the body's adjusted or whatever and make it look like it's moving because they're taking still shots. So
yeah.
you could always construct Allah from a Mr. Potato Head and maybe put the eyes in the wrong spot or
That'd
like
be
kids always
interesting.
did. Remember as a
Might
kid?
have to like drill more holes into the Mr. Potato Head to make everything
yeah, that's true.
enough arms and stuff.
That's true. You're gonna have to use more than one Mr. Potato Head then too, because you're gonna need two right arms.
Yeah, at least. I mean, we could use the ear hole. I don't know. Is there a verse about like the ear of Allah listening or anything like that? Or
I mean,
ears?
see again, this is like where I would be okay. In other cases, when the Quran talks about Allah having eyes and seeing, well, when it talks about him seeing, we know he does so by means of these eyes. So if it elsewhere says he hears but doesn't mention the ears, I would infer that there are ears, right? He's that kind of God, isn't he? But Muslims put on the brakes there, and so
yeah,
we got to say he's got eyes, but well, okay, that was a Rafidi who said that he smells, but I'm trying to think. There's a see, this is a very complex area because I think the sources are clear enough that Allah has these features, but some of the details of this can be debated. So I know earlier Muslims, there's a Muslim, I'm trying to think of his name. He wasn't, I know his name. He wasn't a outlier, right? He was a very prominent Muslim. I'm trying to pull up one of my old articles on this. Here it is. His name is Ibn Khuzaimah. So if you've heard that Bukhari and Muslim are the top of the top when it comes to the hadiths, right? These are supposedly the most authentic narrations, right? Well, it doesn't mean that only those found in Bukhari are authentic. There are other sound narrations outside of Bukhari. There are other hadith collections, such as Ahmed ibn Hanbal. Well, another hadith collector who had a lot of prominence in Islam was Ibn Khuzaimah. He's the collector of a very wide, very large number of hadith. But here's a quote from Ibn Khuzaimah, one of my favorite quotes. He said, "If Allah does not have eyes, nor ears, nor hand, nor foot, then what we are worshiping is a watermelon." So that's where I get the idea of Mr. Potato Head.
Yeah, that's so strange.
Because the assumption is this: Allah is a substantial thing. He has a form. He's a thing. There's statements in the Islamic sources where Allah is referred to as a thing, and that's important because you have some Muslims who say he's not a thing. That term's not properly used for him because the thing indicates some kind of substantial existence, right? Not some abstract or spiritual or immaterial reality, but a concrete thing. And so there are statements that refer to Allah as a thing, and it refers to Allah's form. And so what Ibn Khuzaimah is saying is if he doesn't have these appendages, these parts, well, he's just this amorphous blob. He's this watermelon. He's like a Mr. Potato Head without the parts, right? I mean, he didn't have the Mr. Potato Head analogy available to him, so he used the watermelon, right? That's Ibn Khuzaimah. And Ibn Khuzaimah, like I said, remember, he was no sloucher. He was a very important early Muslim. Here's another quote from Ibn Khuzaimah. He said, God has affirmed, this is from his Kitab Tawheed, so it's on Tawheed. Allah has affirmed for himself a splendid and venerable face, which he declares is eternal and non-perishable. That's what we were talking about earlier. His face won't perish. We and all the scholars of our madhab from the Hijaz and Tihama, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Egypt affirm for Allah a face, which he has affirmed for himself. We profess it with our tongues and believe it in our hearts, and so on and so forth. And he goes on to talk about other attributes of Allah. But there's a prominent early Muslim, one of the collectors of their hadiths. I forget one of his claims to fame besides being a hadith collector, but he was a very prominent Muslim. So go ahead.
We do have actually a Muslim who called in.
Oh, cool.
So we
But
do have that.
to just follow up on what you're saying, Anthony, if the only thing that remains of Allah is the face, which was that in the list of things that if Allah was a without, he'd be a watermelon? Because if the face isn't mentioned in that list, then that means like the only thing that remains of Allah in the end is a watermelon.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, I wonder if that's the face is the watermelon. I don't know. So who's our Muslim guest?
So we'll go ahead and bring him on up.
Oh, all religions are valid. Does he truly qualify as a Muslim?
Yeah, yes, brother. It's in the Quran. All religions are valid.
That's not what the Quran teaches.
All religion.
So would you say this religion that I'm about to describe is valid? The religion that says there's only one way to God through Jesus Christ?
Yes.
That's a valid religion?
So then that means that there's only one way. There's only one religion.
Yeah, so it's valid to say that everybody who doesn't believe in Christ alone as their savior is lost? Is that valid?
That's not valid. That's not.
Well,
what do you mean that's not? Well, then all religions aren't valid.
Yes.
All right, you're done. Next argument. No, next wait, what do you do?
Oh, sorry. I thought we were going to next caller. No,
I mean, if you have to end, we can end, but that first argument's gone. So what's your next topic, Syed?
Let me explain to you what I mean.
No, next argument, that one's dead.
No, it's not dead. You're just
dead.
declaring
dead in the water.
You do not even ask me why.
Dead. It is deader than Muhammad.
No, you cannot. Let me explain to you. Then you can say it's dead or not. Okay?
No,
you see,
you can't keep going back over the same thing. We got to make progress here. You just refuted it. You sawed off.
No, you did not.
You pulled the rug out from under your feet.
You refuted in your mind, brother. You refute to yourself. You refute to yourself. You did not.
I let you refute you. You brought the rope to your own hanging.
First, understand. Okay.
Next topic.
Next topic. Okay.
What's
Okay.
your question?
The Allah has a hand, legs. Let me. What is Allah in the Quran? He described himself. I will read
Yeah.
to you.
He has
Then you
hands,
can.
3875,
No, listen to me. Listen to me.
face,
Allah described.
2888.
Listen to me.
Are you going to quote Surah 42:11 and 112:4?
Can you give me a time to explain to you something, or you
Okay.
just made up
Okay,
your
my
mind?
fun's over. Go ahead.
Look, this is Surah 11, 1, 1, 2. Okay, let me explain to you. This is Surah Ikhlas. Okay,
You're quoting the
think
very
you-
verse I said you were going to quote. Okay, go ahead and quote it.
okay. 1:12, 1. Okay,
Nothing that can be compared to him.
say is Allah, who is one. Okay,
Solid.
Allah, the eternal refuge.
Samad.
Neither,
Solid.
listen. He neither beget nor he is born. Okay, nor is there is any equivalent to him. So Allah is not has a son. He is not like a human being. Okay, he does not have
No. Don't go beyond the Quran. Says there's nothing like him, right?
nothing like him.
Okay.
So
Does the Quran also say that the believing women are not like the unbelieving women?
what this has to do anything?
Well, are they women?
What?
Are they women?
There is a believing man, nothing like unbelieving man too.
Yeah. So are they men?
So what?
Are they men?
Yes. I mean,
Well,
what are you
then
talking about?
Then don't point to a verse that says there's nothing like Allah. If I can point
Nothing-
to verses that say there's nothing like the believing women or nothing like the believing men. I'm just giving you, by the way, the same arguments that Muslims make with respect to these verses and how they do not rule out that Allah has these features that he ascribes to himself. So you're contradicting the Quran itself, which says Allah has these features.
Listen, brother, listen first, understand before you refute us, okay?
Okay, that one's refuted too, though, just so we know.
You just now you're gonna declare victory.
Yeah, I'm looking for number 3 now. What's the next one?
Listen.
Go ahead.
Our God does not have he's not like a human, any creature, okay? He does not have a hand, he does not have an eye, he
Yes,
does not have.
3875. He has a hand. 2888. He has a face.
Brother, I'm telling you, my God does not have. You telling me my God has a. What is that?
No, the Quran's telling you that
Yeah,
he has.
Quran-
No, but Quran,
We're just pointing it out.
The
no,
Quran
those
trumps
are metaphoric language. Allah says those are metaphoric language. Okay.
It's not metaphor.
It-
We already went over why it's not metaphor.
No. Look, our God does not have a son, father, anything. Okay.
We agree that he did not
He's-
find the right
he-
lady yet.
He's
No, that
not
he was
male.
interested in men and only sleeping with men.
God-
we
God
already
is
talked about
not male.
Allah is gay.
God is not male or female. Like your God is a male.
No, your God
right?
has loins. Your God has loins.
No. Those are metaphoric language. I can
It's not
explain to you.
metaphoric. It's not
I-
metaphoric.
He metaphorically grabbed him.
Yeah.
I can explain to you what does that mean. God has a shin. I can explain to you.
All right. How about this? So the hadith say that Allah placed his hand between Muhammad's shoulder blades. What does that metaphor mean?
Where is that? Bring it to me.
Well, I just brought it to you. What does it mean?
Which verse? Which verse?
It's not a verse. It's a hadith.
Yes, hadith. You don't talk about hadith. Is hadith?
Oh, you
is
don't like
not
the
a-
Oh, he
hadith?
doesn't
Then
like
why
the
should I
hadith.
listen to
What?
the Quran? It's the
No,
hadith
no.
to tell me what the Quran is.
No, Quran. The hadiths are man-made. Okay, it's not the prophet who
Oh,
wrote
okay.
the hadith.
Okay. No, this is great. So you can't appeal to the hadith now. The hadith
I
are
do
off the
believe.
table.
I do
Surah
believe in hadith.
3875 now. Surah 3875 says that Allah created Adam with his own 2 hands.
Yeah,
And
that's a
Satan
metaphoric language. Look,
Okay, what is the metaphor? No,
okay.
tell me what the metaphor means.
Look. I'll give you something.
No. Tell me what the metaphor means.
Metaphor means is trying to explain to you something. Give you
What?
example.
Yeah, what's
Is
it
that-
trying to explain to me? When it says Allah
just
created
the-
Adam with his 2 hands, what does that mean?
First of all, let me tell you how God created thing. When
No.
he got, so listen to me.
You're
Second.
telling me it's a metaphor. You've got no evidence.
Okay, listen. When God planned to create something, he created a mind into his mind. Then he said, "Be, it is." Then it's happened. That's how God created.
Wait a minute. So there's a difference though between Adam and everything else. But how does it preclude that Allah first created Adam by his hands, molding him, and then said, "Be"? Couldn't he do both?
He's just a metaphoric when he say
You said metaphoric. Allah didn't say
God
metaphoric.
does not have a hands. Okay,
keep
God
saying
does
that.
not have a hand.
You keep
Where
saying
does
that.
it say God doesn't have hands?
The nature God said,
Specifically.
when I plan to create something, he said, "Be," and it is. That's
Okay,
how
It
God
doesn't
let's
say
run with
it doesn't
this.
have hands.
Right. Let's run with this side. So you're saying that when it says Allah created Adam with his hands, it means he simply said "be," right? Right?
That's just he giving you example.
Is that right or wrong? That's what the metaphor means.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So should Satan and the other angels bow down to everything in creation?
No, it's just bow down to Adam.
Why should they
in
just bow
a
down to
respect
Adam?
bow down.
Why were they only required to bow down to Adam? What does Surah 38:75 say?
That's what God wants to do. The
What
reason
does
he
Surah-
got
Hey,
okay,
Syed.
let me explain to you. It's a
Syed.
He doesn't
angel
want to
going.
answer the question.
Syed, what does Surah
Okay.
38:75 say?
No, give me bring the verse over here so I can.
How
read it
could
and
you
explain.
refuse? How come I know your Quran better than you? How can you refuse to bow down to somebody that I created with my own two hands?
Yes.
Satan was
I
told to bow down to Adam because he was made with Allah's hands. You said that's just a metaphor for how he created everything. So if it's a metaphor for the way he created everything, why shouldn't Satan and the angels bow down to everything?
What are you trying to say? I mean, this.
I'm trying to say your God has hands.
No.
It's
we
not a
don't
metaphor.
believe it.
It's
If
not
we
a
say we
metaphor,
don't
Syed.
believe it, then how can you say we believe that?
Because your scholars say it and it's in your sources.
No, our scholar doesn't say. You see,
Yeah.
They do. Actually, overwhelming number.
Yeah.
These are Salafi, minority Salafi. They say, but they still say we don't know what kind of hand he has.
They say, that's not helpful. He has hands, but we don't know what they look like. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe they're these big, hairy, clumpy looking things.
And
how does that get your anthropomorphic deity off the hook?
Look, there is I give you there is a verse 24:35. Allah say, Allah is the light of the heaven and earth. The example of his light is like a niche within is a lamp.
Wait, why are you giving me an analogy for Allah?
Because Allah want to understand what is Allah.
There's nothing like him.
Nothing like him.
Why are you making comparisons?
No. This is trying to
explain. Comparison. It's an analogy. Surah 112:4 says there's nothing you can compare to him. Now you're contradicting. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Allah's contradicting himself because that analogy is from Allah, isn't it?
Okay, let me how I imagine Allah. Let me explain to you how.
Wait, why are you imagining Allah? That's idolatry.
Yep. Listen to me.
That's forbidden.
Allah, I imagine Allah is, according to this ayah, is Allah is a light, is a nur, a light. That's all Allah is. And
so you're worshiping a lion? That doesn't seem like very good.
A light.
He's saying
it's just a light.
A light. So you're worshiping a light.
Yeah, just a light. That's all. Allah
I think
is
the
a
lights
light.
are out.
That's all you can say. He does not have hand, eye. He does not have anything.
Wait, that's just a metaphor.
Literally, that one is a metaphor. I think you're confusing metaphors with actual descriptions.
No, your God.
It seems like
you explain me about your God. How he look like.
We're not talking about that.
Yeah, this show's about Allah. But from the Christian
title is.
From the Bible describes God as infinite, eternal, unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. The Quran describes Allah. The Quran describes Allah having a face, a form, a shape, a side, a shin, hands, a foot, right? These things are ascribed to your deity, and the hadith, they just go wild here and start ascribing all sorts of
Okay.
activity to these features.
Mr. Raja, you explain to me your God, how he looked like in physical form, how he looked like. Tell me.
This show isn't about that, and I already talked about the way the Bible describes God, and it doesn't get Islam off the hook.
No, forget about that. Islam.
Yeah, he wants to shift the topic. He's
no.
caught
You,
with his pants
I
down.
explained to you about my God. I explained to you about my God. My God is a light.
Dodged.
A light of
kind of hid the truth.
Okay. My God is a light.
Clearly says
And
that
your God, tell me about your God.
Face. It has eyeballs that aren't attached to that face. There's no indication that those eyes are in the face.
My God is a
shin.
How many eyeballs does Allah have?
My God is a light. And explain your God.
Your God's a light, like a light bulb, or
just
more
light.
It's
just light.
I don't know what you mean, just light. I have no example of just light. There's the sun, there's light bulbs, there's a match, there's a candle. What kind of light do you think most resembles Allah?
We cannot see. You know, when Moses said, Moses said to God, I want to see you. And
was that when Allah appeared in a tree?
He does not appear on tree.
It says it in the Quran.
No.
Yes.
Allah does not appear on tree.
There's 4 different chapters of the Quran. Surah 19,
Brother,
Surah 20, Surah 27, Surah 28. 4 chapters of the Quran say your God hung out in a tree. It doesn't tell us if he first made a tree house. It doesn't tell us anything else, but it says he spoke
in that verse, listen. If that tree is God, you're saying, Moses said, ask God to show me your face. I want to see you. Okay, that's the same word. And Allah said, you cannot see me. You cannot see me.
No, here's what it says. Surah 27, verse 7. Remember when Moses said to his family, I've spotted a fire. I will either bring you some directions from there or a burning torch so you may warm yourselves. But when he came to it, the fire, he was called by Allah. Blessed is the one in the fire and those who are around it. Glory be to Allah, Lord of the worlds. And then Moses said, he said to Moses, it is truly I am Allah, the Almighty, the Wise. So Allah is explicitly said to be in the fire. What happened?
I don't know. He has been stunned in silence.
Hello? I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. Did Moses ask Allah to show his face?
If you're saying that's in the Quran, you show me. I just showed you where the Quran
says you want to see that?
Allah was in the fire.
No, Moses asked Allah
to
show God's face. He want to see the Allah face. And Allah said, you cannot see me.
You can't see me. I'm hiding in a tree.
No. Because
I got you to laugh. You need to teach Alonzo how to laugh. And this other Skype guy, these guys are very uptight.
No, because I don't care what you believe. You know, I believe you are a good kid. If you believe in God and be good to other human beings, you go to heaven. That's what Allah said.
So now let me return the favor. As a good Christian, let me tell you, if you don't believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and turn to him for the remission of sins, you will perish. It's my desire for you to come to him and know him and have forgiveness.
So, that's your belief. I respect that. I respect that. Whatever you
respect
believe,
it.
I respect.
I don't think you like that.
No. Allah recognized Christianity as a legitimate religion. Allah recognized
Allah
Buddhism.
changed his mind about that.
Allah recognized Hinduism.
He changed his mind about that.
No.
At one point, he kind of liked Christians, but then he I guess we got on his nerves or something. I don't know. But
they refer to all Christians being worst of creatures as well as Jews.
No,
98.6. 98.6.
The words of Christian
classification is not for it, no limitation for it. It is all Christians and Jews.
I got a question for you,
Syed.
So, you know, like sometimes in the Quran, it'll say Like, for example, it says Allah's the best of planners, right?
Yes, yes.
You
Best
remember
of
that?
plan.
Yeah. So
Yes.
when it says that, it means there are people that plan, but Allah's the best of them, right? Allah's the best of planners,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Have you also reflected on the statement of the Quran where it refers to Allah as the best of creators?
Yeah, yes, yes, yes.
How many creators are there?
No. He telling the human also creator. Human are also creator.
Women,
Allah telling
no, that doesn't.
Humans
no.
create?
They
we
Are
don't.
creators
invent.
with
We
Allah?
we invent
Wow, that
things.
seems to be a bit of an issue.
We invent things. So Allah telling, I'm
It
the
doesn't say
best.
invent, it says create.
That's the same thing. It is the same thing.
No,
So there's not one
creation's
creator.
very different.
Yeah, that's the same thing. Allah telling, I'm the best planner.
So why does Allah, how about this? Why does that same Allah who speaks of being the best of creators say things like we decreed, we created, we sent down?
It's just a language. It's just a royal language. That's all.
How come Muslim scholars say there was no such thing as a plural of majesty at the time of Muhammad? Like M.A.S. Abdul Halim, for example, very well-known Muslim scholar, translator of the Quran. He says there was no such thing. When you look at earlier Muslim interpreters of this, none of them said it was the plural of majesty. That seems to be a very later. In fact, if you look at Ibn Yitzhak's Surat Rasulullah, his biography of Muhammad, the Christians of Najran, who were native Arabic speakers, who came from Najran in Arabia, they asked Muhammad, if your deity is only one, why does he speak in the plural? They didn't think that this was just a figure of speech for a majesty speaking in the plural. And when Muhammad answered them, he didn't give that explanation. Do you know what Muhammad said in reply?
Mm-hmm.
It says he didn't say anything because he didn't know what to say. That's what the Sira literature says. The next day, he came back with the first 80 verses of Surah 3, and the only thing in Surah 3 that addresses that particular question is Surah 3, verse 7, where it says there's some things in the Quran that are unclear and only Allah knows what they mean. So apparently Allah likes giving out revelations that nobody can make sense of. Only some verses are clear, and the other verses are just unclear. So Muhammad never said this is just a plural of majesty. Allah didn't say it's a plural of majesty. The early Muslims didn't say it's a plural of majesty. Maybe your God's holding out on you. Maybe when he says he's the best of creators, it really means that there's a plurality of creators. He disappeared again, but he changed his little symbol.
That's what he's doing. Instead of listening, he's just changing his symbol around.
You think?
Because that takes a little bit of time to upload that image and get it altered each time.
Well,
so, I guess he decided not to continue the conversation, or he's having technical difficulties. I do not know which. I would not assume either. But this is a good opportunity. I do want to let you guys know there is a link in the description to an upcoming conference in Ohio. They'll actually be with Ministry to Muslims, but it should be a good time there. We have multiple speakers lined up for it. I will be there personally. Should be a good time. It's Seek and Share Truth. The link is in the description, as well as I just posted it in the live chat. It's free tickets for anyone who wants to come. So you guys are all invited. All the Christians are invited to that. It should be a good, fun time there. So with that, I believe that was our final caller. So we will go ahead and wrap this on up with prayer. But before we do that, Anthony, what are you working on?
Oh my, I'm working on far too many things. I have stacks of books surrounding me. But I've started a new series with Tony Costa on Sola Scriptura in the Church Fathers. I've got stuff going on my own channel on the book of Galatians. I've been working through that. We're still in chapter 1, but I've done like 60 hours plus on the book of Galatians. I've got a bunch of other studies that I'm doing on the channel, stuff on Messianic prophecy. Islamic stuff pops up on there from time to time. I recently posted a couple of things I delivered at the recent Our Strong Tower conference put on by Ministry to Muslims. So there's all kinds of good stuff going on over there. And I got a bunch of other special guest appearances besides this one. So maybe maybe you guys spread the word and said, hey, let's keep Anthony busy. I don't know.
Well, if you guys have not checked out the content that Anthony is putting out, go do that. His link is in the description as well. And with that, we'll go ahead and pray our way out. Lord of heaven and earth, we come before you. We thank you for this time to study, this time to look into it, and bring this information to the light. I ask for your hand to be upon any Muslims who are watching this, that you give them wisdom and guidance to come to know you completely and to know the Redeemer as well. I ask for your hand to be upon everyone else that was listening to this. Give them guidance and draw them closer to you. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pray. The name above all names. Amen.
Amen.